Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 281. It was only for a blink of an eye. The errand boys found their bodies suddenly engulfed in pitch black lightning. Death was imminent, their vision turned pitch black, and for a moment, they wondered if they had died. Poof! The pitch black lightning that had covered their eyes disappeared, revealing a bright landscape. Crackle, crackle, they could see Wu Jin beyond the black lightning. The errand boys turned their heads and looked at each other. Their expressions showed that they were wondering who had stopped it. Everyone had the same expression. None of the three errand boys had stopped Wu Jin's attack. The second test is also over. A husky voice. The errand boys turned their heads to the shadow covering their bodies. There, a large manager with a beard covering his face stood. Manager Nim, your role is over, you can go now. A merciless voice. They wanted to ask for one more chance to save face, but they couldn't. They wondered how they could block the same attack they had just experienced if they fought again. And they didn't dare to defy the manager's words. I'm sorry. The errand boys bowed their heads and stepped back. At the same time, the manager looked at Wu Jin, who had been watching him the whole time, in the empty space where the errand boys had disappeared. Isn't this too much? What kind of test is this? Wu Jin let out a sigh. He had a hunch, but he didn't think the manager would actually appear before him. He wondered if the managers were really sane. This is more like an event than a test. It's meant to be enjoyed. Only you guys are enjoying it. Yes, only us. The guys outside can't see anything because the stage has changed here. The manager burst into laughter. Thanks to that guy is really pissed off. He was planning to promote Muspelheim with this test, but now it's all messed up. Originally, this test was planned by the manager of the 65th floor with the other managers. It was more of an event than a test. Like the martial arts competition in the martial arts world, this test was also an event to provide entertainment for free rankers and players. Anyway, it's really fun. Boom, boom, the huge castle shook. The manager's expression was filled with excitement. Just a few years ago, the guy who was trembling in the tutorial I was in is now taking this test in front of me. The first time he saw the manager of the tutorial was when he exposed the relationship between the errand boys and Olympus. At that time, the manager was furious at Wu Jin's words and defeated the errand boys in an instant. Even then, the manager was a distant and lofty existence in Wu Jin's eyes. He couldn't dare approach him, and he was so high up that he couldn't even be seen. But now, the situation was different. I can see it a little bit. Administrator. The beings who ruled this tower were no different from gods. In reality, they performed miracles in this tower that were no different from those of gods. But that didn't mean they were invincible. In fact, there had been a case a long time ago where an administrator had been killed by a top-ranking high ranker. Don't be too nervous. Goo 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 goo. Mana gathered in the administrator's fist. Because I'm just an administrator of the tutorial. I'm not skilled and I'm simple, so I don't have any other great abilities besides this. A hand stretched out. Without any special skills, it was just a fist filled with condensed mana. He didn't have any great abilities. That was definitely like an administrator of the tutorial. But that didn't mean he could be ignored. I don't know if he can't use skills or if he just doesn't use them. Quagak. Yu-Won gripped his sword tightly. My opponent is an administrator. No matter how much he could estimate his height, the fact that he was still out of reach remained unchanged. If his abilities were limited to physical abilities and mana, he had to be even more vigilant. If he had a special skill, he could find a way to counter it, but there was no countermeasure for a brute force. As expected, then, boong, the administrator's fist stretched out. Let's begin. A slow fist stretched out into the empty void. The moment he saw it, goosebumps. A strange sense of danger was detected in the sensory field that was already filling the room. Tuaik. Yu-Won jumped high into the air using Hermes' footsteps and looked at the hole that had just appeared behind where he had been standing. Straight from the fist, The wall was cleanly pierced without any fuss. And the next moment, Susit, the administrator, his eyes turned red, could be seen moving past him. I clearly said let's begin. Yuan's body, which had jumped high into the air, turned back up. This isn't a surprise attack. Just before his voice was heard. The giant's arm is equipped to your body. Uduk. Mana spread throughout Yuan's body, and the power of the giant filled his body. It was almost simultaneous. JJing. The administrator's fist struck Yuan from above. Quang. It pierced the floor and buried itself deep into the ground. Yuan couldn't overcome the administrator's power. Ocean's Embrace is equipped to your body. Ocean's Embrace protects your body. Ocean's Embrace is activated. Defense partially failed. It was tingling. I thought I had blocked it with the giant transformation, but that wasn't the case. The skill that had been protecting Yuan's body was broken with a single blow. Furthermore, the shock remained, leaving a sharp pain in both arms that had blocked the fist. What kind of ridiculous power is this? I knew Heracles was the strongest physically in the tower. It was a new realization. This tower is really vast, and there are all sorts of things here. Maybe not. The ocean's blessing has awakened. No matter how much he used his giant transformation, it was impossible to block such a thing head-on. He had to deflect or dodge as much as possible. Yuan assumed that he was facing Hercules. What are you thinking? The administrator, who had been waiting for Yuan, raised his fist once more. I don't intend to wait any longer. Boom, quang, creak, thud. The floor of the castle cracked under the administrator's fist. Furniture toppled over, and the entire castle shook. Bang, quang, bang. The administrator continued to punch. The administrator, who had been punching with all his might, suddenly felt something strange and stopped. He felt a tingling sensation in his hand. OWWWW. When he looked at his hand, he saw a burn mark. Soon after, a pillar of fire rose from the ground. Fwoosh. The fire soared high. It was small, but it was hot enough to burn the administrator's body. Is this the fire that Surt was so desperately collecting? Surt was a being whose power posed a threat even to the administrators. Naturally, what he did was something to be wary of for the administrators, and they had some understanding of his movements and actions. Fire. A huge mass of magical power that Surt had gathered over the long years of hardship. It was now in Yuan's body. It seems that I can't handle it properly yet. Fwoosh, fwoosh. Yuan, who had been buried in the ground, walked out with fire wrapped around his body. Quang. The sound of an electric shock rang out behind him. He turned his head and saw Yuan with blood-red eyes, swinging his sword down. Zeezing. The administrator raised his arm and blocked Yuan's sword. At the same time, purple flames surged like a wave and engulfed the administrator. Fwoosh. Pissed. The flames exploded. The administrator, who had been protecting his head with both hands, slowly raised his head. He couldn't find Yuan. As expected. Boom. Bang. He felt a pain in his arm, which he had raised reflexively. A wound had appeared and blood was dripping down. I have to admit that you're a skilled fighter. Bang, bang, bang. The sword struck his body, making a sound like a lump of coal hitting him. It was becoming increasingly difficult to keep up with the speed, and in terms of strength, Yuan was beginning to catch up to the administrator. The administrator looked at Yuan. Crack, crackle, fwoosh, darkness, electricity, and fire. The three types of magical power were mixed together and surrounded his body. When the three types of magical power with the greatest destructive power were mixed together, the degree to which his body was strengthened was extraordinary. And on top of that, he can use his giant transformation to withstand that magical power. It was too harmonious to be considered a mere coincidence. The power that could easily become a mishmash had made the skill of giant transformation its home. Although it still seemed a little small and clumsy. You're complete. Bang. His fist and sword collided. Crackle. The high ceiling shook and the castle tilted slightly. Yuan's eyes sparkled again. In an instant, the distance between them widened. Flames swirled. A single, small firefly remained before the administrator's eyes. Boom. It exploded. The administrator, engulfed in a giant flame, glared at Yuan. How dare you? Bam. The administrator kicked off the ground and flew toward Yuan. The distance between them closed in an instant. Yuan didn't dodge and collided with him. Flash. Boom. The castle shook again as the two of them clashed. Every time they collided, debris from the crumbling building fell below and cracks appeared on the walls. He's tough. Sweat began to bead on Yuan's forehead as he swung his sword at the administrator. His stamina was rapidly depleting. Thump, thump. His heart pounded violently. It was as if it was screaming for him to stop. An unbearable amount of mana was flowing from his heart throughout his body. But, there's no way to fight the administrator without pushing myself. The administrator was an opponent he could fight with all his might. And in this fight, Yuan could test how far he had come. Such opportunities were rare. Moreover, the reward would vary depending on the outcome of this test. In the first place, this test was not about defeating the administrator. This test is a kind of event, they said, providing entertainment for players, rankers, and administrators. And he was the main character who created this stage. In this test, the reward was determined by the process, rather than the result. Thump. That's why he was pushing himself this hard in a fight against an opponent he didn't have to defeat. However, even that did not last long. Flames swirled. Thump. Yuan's movements noticeably faltered as his heart felt like it was burning up. Ku. His heart felt like it was melting. A massive amount of mana, incomparable to what it was now, erupted from his violently beating heart. His heart, which had swallowed the fire, was drawing its power out. I can't hold on for more than a few minutes. The duration was shorter than he thought. It was because the fire erupting from his heart was much stronger than he had anticipated. It was truly an ignorant amount. No wonder Surtur coveted it so much. Even now, its limits had not yet been fully revealed. It was definitely a difficult power to handle. Above all, since the source of the power was embedded in his heart, the more he forcibly drew out the power, the greater the strain on his heart. But thanks to that, Yuan gritted his teeth at the flames boiling up from his heart. One more shot. He had one more, most powerful shot left. I should be able to land at least one shot. Chapter 282. Thump, 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 thump. It felt as if a drum was beating in the center of his chest. It felt like it was about to burst open soon. His chest was boiling and it was becoming difficult to control his body. It seems like you're preparing something. The administrator looked at the rapidly inflating magic power. Something is coming, and this time, it was something quite menacing. Whoosh! Violet flames enveloped the area around Wu Jin. Master of Mana, controls the holy fire. Wang Qianzhang, controls the holy fire. There were many ways to control fire. However, the size of the fire spewing from his heart was not small enough to be handled just because there were a few ways to control it. Abnormal status. Burn begins. Abnormal status. Burn rises to level 2. Abnormal status. Burn. Abnormal status. Overload begins. Overload. It was the most serious abnormal status among the abnormal statuses that could be inflicted. This wasn't simply about getting injured, but it was evidence that his body itself was beginning to break down. This is it. If overload began, there was a possibility that his body would be damaged and his stats themselves would be reduced. He had already been greedy enough. This was it. Ahk. He condensed the flames that were spewing out into his sword. The administrator, who saw the flaming sword being slowly created in Wu Jin's hand, raised the corners of his lips in surprise. This is more than I expected. The giant flaming sword that Surt had held in his hand. That sword was being created in Wu Jin's hand right now. Let's see how it compares. Whoosh! Flames surged towards the administrator. He had no intention of dodging. It didn't suit the administrator's nature. Screech! Magic power surged from the administrator's fingertips. Boom! A giant flame engulfed the administrator's body. The players who had been fighting Susanoo stopped moving. Thick smoke filled the sky, and a giant flame blossomed over the castle. Fire! What's going on? Is there a fight going on inside? Who is it with? Rumble, rumble, rumble. The castle, which had been weakened by the fire, slowly tilted to the side. It seemed like it would collapse and fall on top of them at any moment. Let's get out of here for now. Damn it, the test is completely ruined. Hey, hurry. The castle, which had begun to tilt, collapsed in an instant. The top of the castle, which had soared high into the sky, crashed to the ground. The top of the castle, which had soared high into the sky, fell to the ground. Zeus, king and one of the Olympians. Since they were players from the upper floors, it wasn't difficult for them to dodge the falling debris. Kablam, crash, rumble. The giant's castle collapsed. While the debris was falling, the players who had found a safe place slowly looked up at the pillar of fire that had shot up into the sky. I can feel the heat all the way up here. What kind of test is this? This isn't a test. The minds of the players who had been trying to climb the tower and collect rewards through this test turned white. Even when Susanoo had appeared, they had thought that they would be able to overwhelm him with numbers. However, the problem wasn't the Susanoo in front of them. Look at that pillar of fire. If they were to get caught up in a test where something like that appeared, even 10 lives wouldn't be enough. I'm giving up. Me too, I can't do this. Fear and conflict spread in an instant. As one or two of them began to give up on the test, the other players also shouted that they were giving up. In the first place, it was closer to an event like the martial arts tournament than a life or death test. The errand boys who had been waiting diligently began to move the players who had declared their forfeit to another location. And the spectators outside watched the scene. Is that Surtur's fire? Hades, who had been disappointed that he hadn't been able to see Wu Yun fight properly, looked at the pillar of fire that had just appeared on the screen. He knew that Wu Yun had obtained Surtur's fire through Heracles. The question was how he would handle it, but it seemed that he was handling it better than expected. A fire of that size. The castle of the giants must have been the size of a small city. If it was comparable in size to a castle of that size, it meant that it had the power to burn down a small city in an instant. Apollo, you, thump, thump. Hades turned his head and found Apollo trembling. Of the rankers who wielded the power of fire magic, Apollo was considered the best in Olympus. And yet, he was trembling. Why are you like that? Apollo muttered in a small voice as he looked at the size of the fire on the screen. My father was the one who could use the widest range of skills in Olympus. Father, if not for that, perhaps one of my limbs would have been crushed by now, or I might have collapsed unconscious from the shock. One of the 3 gods of Olympus, the king, Zeus. As Apollo had said, Zeus was capable of exerting power that could instantly annihilate an entire city. My father is great, but it's also true that electric attribute magic is generally easier to expand its range. On the other hand, fire. Unable to finish his sentence, Apollo blurted out the thought that had just come to his mind rather than giving a complicated explanation. I've never seen such a large fire, except for Surtur. Hades stroked his rough beard at Apollo's explanation. Surtur. He was definitely known to be the strongest in terms of fire attribute magic. However, the power possessed by the guy who had entered the tower just a few years ago made him mention Surtur. I thought he was unusual even when he fought Zeus, but to think he'd become this strong in just a few years. Suddenly, he became curious. What if? At the forceful voice, Apollo took his eyes off the screen and looked back at Hades. What if that guy and I fought? What do you think would happen? Against Father. Apollo hesitated for a moment. His opponent was none other than Hades. Hades, the god of death. He was the new king who led Olympus after Zeus had stepped down, and his ranking had risen to 43rd, higher than before. But still, unless it was sweet flattery that he wanted to hear, the answer Apollo could give was set. I'm not sure. He couldn't be sure. Of course, Hades was one of the greatest and strongest beings in this tower that Apollo knew of. However, just a short while ago, to Apollo, who had lived for thousands of years, it felt as short as a moment ago, Wu Jin had reached Hades's realm. It was hard to believe even when he saw it with his own eyes. I'm not sure, and Hades felt the same way. Swish. Beyond the screen, Hades muttered as he looked at the castle where Wu Jin was. No matter what happens, I have to make sure that guy is on my side. Thud. A heavy shock was transmitted through his body. It felt like another rock had been piled on top of him. I wonder how many piles of rocks I'm buried under. Blessing of the sea is imbued in your body. That was fortunate, though. Perhaps because the skill's cooldown time had passed, the blessing of the sea protected his body again. If not for that, one of his limbs would have been crushed or he would have collapsed unconscious from the shock. It hurts. Me too. Thud, thud, thud. A voice came from his bedside in response to his curt remark. Right at Yuan's bedside, the administrator rose, carrying the numerous rocks off his body. Aren't you the only one who's dying? Should I get rid of yours too? No, it's okay to leave it like this. He was too tired to get up now. Even though there were rocks piled on his body, it was more comfortable than he thought. Right now, it felt most comfortable to lie down like this. But what do you mean by me too? Yuan raised his head while lying down and looked up at the administrator above him. The clothes he was wearing burned and disappeared, and a jet black burn mark appeared on his chest. It was a mark that had just been created from colliding with him. I won. Looking at you now, I want to say no. The administrator couldn't deny it. I guess so. It was a test that he didn't need to win in the first place. No, in fact, he didn't think he would get hurt. Yuan's flame overwhelmed the magic his fist emitted. Despite undermining his strength and blocking the flames with both arms, he ended up like this. Although it was only one shot, Yuan's flame was comparable to Surtur's. Thud, thud, thud. The pile of rocks on Yu-Won's body moved. Wondering what he was doing, he watched as Yu-Won used gigantification on his arms to remove the pile of rocks. Bang, rumble. Yu-Won, who had pushed the pile of rocks that had been covering his body to the side, collapsed to the floor. Watching him, the administrator spoke as if he were impressed. You really hate getting help from others. Doesn't even this small help affect the reward? As expected, you know us well. It was a statement that couldn't be denied. There was no such thing as a free lunch for the errand boy and the administrator who intervened in the test. Even their smallest favors tended to affect the rewards of the test. Yu-Won knew that, so he tried not to receive any help from the administrators. What's the reward? Choose one of the two. Multiple choice. Sometimes this happened when a higher record was set than the existing requirement. Yu-Won nodded and listened to the administrator's words. After much deliberation, Yu-Won nodded and listened to the administrator's words. He had to think carefully about his choice. The first is to receive the authority to go up to the 79th floor as promised. But that's not enough for me. An item, or a skill. Yes, the remaining reward will be given as an item. An item. It probably won't be an ordinary item. Among the administrator's tests, it would be difficult to find a test with this much difficulty. He had high expectations. Yu-Won waited for the next option. And the second is the authority to climb to the top of the tower. To the top. It was a tempting offer. Yu-Won needed time, and taking the test and climbing the tower was the task that would take up the most time out of Yu-Won's current plans. If so, he would be able to save a lot of time. He knows what I need. He's telling me to choose between time and an item. He didn't know what kind of item would come out. If he happened to get an item that he didn't need, it could end up being a useless trinket. On the other hand, time would never betray him. But on the other hand, climbing the tower was something he could always do if he just put in the time. His contemplation wasn't short. The administrator didn't rush him and waited for Yu-Won. After much deliberation, Yu-Won spoke. I'll take the first one. Will the 79th floor be enough for you? I'll go up slowly, not too hastily. I'm fast enough as it is. A hastily built tower was bound to collapse. He was already fast enough, and if he got greedy here, he might end up losing everything he had built up until now. Yu-Won decided to build a stronger foundation. Then it's decided. The test was over, and the reward was decided. Yu-Won, who had relaxed a little, got up from his seat when his body had recovered somewhat while he was resting. The administrator of the tutorial. There was something that had been on his mind ever since he first saw him. There's something I wanted to ask you when I saw you again. Something you want to ask? Yu-Won nodded. Due to the nature of the tower, players who had completed the tutorial could not return to the tutorial. It was a completely different world from this tower. But fortunately, he was able to meet him again like this. The egg you gave me as a reward when the tutorial ended. A maple leaf came out of that egg. And probably. What was that? The administrator before him would know about that guy. Chapter 283. I see. The administrator stroked his chin. The last reward of the tutorial. The administrator before him was the one who had given it to him. Where did you get that? I don't remember very well. Don't lie. You wouldn't have given it to me as a reward if you didn't know what it was, would you? The administrator's lips curled up at Yu-Won's words. I guess you're not as naive as you look. It was certain. The administrator knew the identity of the egg. He knew it and had given it to Yu-Won as a reward. However, then I guess you also know that there is no reason for me to tell you about it. The administrator's answer was different from Yu-Won's expectations. It was not easy to reverse the decision of an administrator once they made up their mind. Their actions and words were determined solely by what was set in stone and followed the system of the tower. And that means, does it fall under information that cannot be spoken of? It meant that it was information that could not yet be told to the players. Yes, there was no great disappointment. He had thought that would be the case from the beginning. Is it because it's related to the outside? The administrators had never once leaked any information about the outer. The administrator's eyes sparkled. Outer. That one word changed the way he looked at Yu-Won. You seem to know a lot. But it was unexpected. He had expected a bigger reaction, but he was calmer than he thought. The outer was like a deadly enemy to the administrators, something they would eventually have to face. But even though he mentioned its existence, the administrator was not very surprised. I thought it was strange. Goo 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 goo. Magic power poured out of the administrator's body again. The uncontrolled magic power weighed down on his body. Unlike Yu-Won, who was full of wounds, the administrator's condition was still intact. He asked Yuan cautiously. Did you come from the outside? Outside, a world separated from the tower, where the outers were thought to live. The administrator was speculating that Yuan might have come from there. If I had, wouldn't I have tried to hide it as much as possible? As Yuan said that, he put his hand into his arms. Then he took out Dana, who was still fast asleep despite the chaos, and showed her to the administrator. You must know about this guy too. Saliva, color. When had it started? Dana continued to sleep. She didn't wake up even when shaken, and she didn't react no matter how loud the fighting was. As soon as the administrator saw Dana, he realized that she was a being hatched from an egg. Well, that's true. Swoosh. The violently gushing magic power was quickly withdrawn. Yuan asked about Dana's existence. That alone seemed to have proven to some extent that Yuan was not a being from the outside. Were you suspicious? We were aware that you were a strange guy. Not just me, but everyone. We were all aware that you were a strange one. Not just me, but everyone. Although he wielded a sword, Yuan also knew how to handle a spear. He was quite skilled in javelin throwing, to the point where he had even thrown the difficult-to-handle Gingnur. The everyone he was referring to meant the administrators of the other floors. Yuan thought he knew why they were so interested in him. It wasn't simply because Yuan had the power to disrupt the order of the tower. They suspected that the player named Yuan might be connected to the outside of the tower. But now, Yuan had mentioned the outside first. Still, one thing is for sure. It seems like you know about the outside. I do know. How? Should I tell you when you won't tell me? The administrator's face crumpled. Of course, it wasn't a wrong statement. They were the same in that they didn't share the information they had. Then just answer this, the administrator asked, organizing his complicated thoughts. Which side are you on? The answer to the question about his relationship with the outer. To the administrators, this would probably be the most important answer. He could answer this question. No, he had to, if only to keep the administrators from becoming his enemies. A moment of contemplation, but soon, Yuan firmed up his resolve and opened his mouth. I came here to fight the outside. You came here. Yuan didn't answer. The administrator also knew that the answer wouldn't come if he pressed and pursued him. He sighed and shook his head. You sly dog. The administrator's gaze turned to Dana, who was on Yuan's hand. Then I'll let you know one thing too. New sap. Whether he knew about this situation or not, Dana was still asleep, showing no signs of waking up. If you're really going to fight them, you'll have to raise him well. This guy. Yuan looked at Dana in his hand at the unexpected words. He was a small and cute guy. He knew that he was great and had many secrets despite his appearance, but he was surprised that he would be evaluated to this extent. The administrator who knows about the outer is saying this. He didn't know for sure, but rather, his curiosity about Dana only grew. I thought he was a natural enemy, but is that really the case? An outer that eats outer. That's why Yuan thought that Dana might be the natural enemy of the outer. At least as far as Yuan knew, eating an outer was something beyond the realm of impossibility. But that was just Yuan's guess, and there was no basis for it. But now that the fact had been somewhat proven through the administrator. Well, now it's time for the reward I've been waiting for. Creak. The administrator reached out his hand. The empty space distorted and the administrator's hand disappeared somewhere. Soon after, the administrator's hand returned with a long, black spear clutched in it. Take it. A spear. It was an item of not bad form. It was an item of not bad form. There was no special technology or scientific power in it. Although using a sword, Yuan knew how to see spear. He had considerable knowledge of javelins, on done time even thrown Gingnur, which was difficult to handle. With a heart pounding, he reached out and received the spear. And then, Nur has been acquired. A familiar name floated up in the message. Near, it's an item you probably know, as you'd expect. As if he'd gotten the reaction he'd been hoping for, the administrator asked with a grin. Gingnur, ever thrown it? Yuan's eyes flashed. Sereno. It wasn't strange that the name Gingnur came to mind when he heard the name Near. The names were similar, and apart from the color, the length and shape of the spear, and even the way it felt in his hand, were all the same. Is it like Gingnur's twin? They are similar. Very similar. Clank. Yuan tightened his grip on the Narinishand. He wanted to hold this spear and fight again right now, if he could. The perfect opponent to test out the spear was right in front of him, so it was only natural that he would have such thoughts. However, if this really is a spear like Gingnur, then in normal circumstances, I won't even be able to activate it. Gingnir was an item that took a long time to activate. Even Odin, who had wielded Gingnir for a long time, took quite a while to activate it, and had to buy time for others to throw their spears. With Yuan's current abilities, it was impossible to buy that much time in a fight with the administrator. Still, there was one thought that came to his mind. If that's the case, then I need to raise the abilities of the King of the Dead. A powerful blow that could be activated required time, and the King of the Dead was an ability that excelled at buying time. I'll need to think about it more. He would appraise the item properly later. He didn't have much time left now. Then I'll be looking forward to it. Moving to the 79th floor. Whoa, it had been a while since he'd seen such a bright halo of light. Along with the halo, Yuan's figure disappeared. You have passed the test. You have arrived on the 66th floor. You have arrived on the 67th floor. You have arrived on the 68th floor. Opening square bracket dot closing square bracket. You have arrived on the 79th floor. Whoa. His murky vision cleared up. This time, it felt like his vision had been white for a long time. The surroundings, which had been nothing but white, gradually returned. Yuan looked around. He was on top of a tall building that overlooked the complex cityscape. The city, which was the size of a small country, and the height of the building, were amazing to see even after coming here again. I think they said it was the 500th floor. How on earth did they build something like this? The power of magic and skills was great. 500th floor. The world Yuan had lived in had been quite advanced, but it had been difficult to build a building this tall. But the power of this world had made it possible. It wasn't special technology or science. This world had magic and skills, and civilization developed through that power. This huge building was proof of that. Did you pass the test? A voice came from behind Yuan. When he turned around, he saw a black-haired woman with a robe and a cane. She seemed to be a guide for the players who had passed the test and come up. Yuan nodded, and she looked puzzled. This is the first time I've seen only one person pass the test. That's what happened. It was complicated to tell the whole story. I'm tired and I don't want to explain everything to a stranger here. The stamina I have left shouldn't be used for something like that. Are you a guide here? Yes. Could you please let me use the training room? I don't remember which floor it was on. There were so many facilities in this huge building. Among them was a training room reinforced for players and rankers. It was a sturdy training room that not only the 79th floor, but also many rankers and guilds from the tower came to use. Are you using it alone? It's going to be a little expensive. It doesn't matter. If that's the case, follow me. The guide turned around. Yuan followed her. It was a long walk, as the area of one floor was about the size of a small island. Yuan followed the guide and got on a transparent elevator. An elevator that quickly went up and down all the floors of the building. Yuan got on it and headed to the 101st floor. That's when it happened. Wang, an unknown player kid of Yuan, rang. Hargan, are you done with the test? Was he watching? It seemed that he knew that Yuan was taking a special test. I don't know why he contacted me after a long time, but Hargan sometimes contacted me when he was bored. Of course, I'll reply later. There was something more urgent now. But, Wang, the moment he checked the message that rang again, Yuan had no choice but to turn around. I'm sorry, I'll come back later. Yes. Regardless of the guide's confusion, Yuan hurriedly got off the elevator. It seemed that I would have to postpone testing the newly acquired item. Something more urgent came up just now. Wang, Yuan called Hargan. A brief dial tone. You must have been in a hurry. It was the first time Yuan had called Hargan first. Naturally, Hargan was surprised. But it couldn't be helped. Because, really, a text from Hargan. It was about the person Yuan was looking for on the 79th floor. You met Zeus. Chapter 284. 21st floor of the building. A playground selling various restaurants, clothes, alcohol, and drinks. Yuan headed down there. This place was listed as a good restaurant on my kit. Really, should we go in there? I'm thirsty. Let's rest for a bit then. We've walked around a lot. People bustling about. The scenery in sight was literally like a giant department store. The 79th floor was one of the worlds with the largest floating population. And in between that, drip, there was a man with a striking appearance, sitting among the crowd and drinking coffee alone. Who is that? Isn't he handsome? Isn't that Hargan? Hargan, Zeus's son. Blondes were common, but it was hard to find hair as dazzlingly shiny as Hargan's. It was thanks to his bloodline. Hargan, who had been searching for news on his player kit, lifted his head at the shadow approaching him. Black hair that was the opposite of his bright hair. It was Yuan. Did you have to wait in a crowded place like this? Creak. Yuan pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, frowning at the pouring gazes. There were some who recognized his face and looked away in embarrassment. Most of them were residents, not players. But in between them, there were some players climbing the tower or rankers mixed in. I'm a bit lenient. I don't really care about gazes like that. Just make sure your voice doesn't leak out. Don't worry. Wang. Mana flowed out around Yuan and Hargan. The sound was distorted. It wasn't like the sound was being blocked at all. They'll probably hear us just chatting outside. How is it? Natural. It was strange to meet in such a crowded place, but it seemed like he had a believable story. He thought he would be able to talk a little more comfortably. You met Zeus? Yes. Hargan leaned forward and spoke in a small voice. He's nearby right now. His words suddenly ended. Yuan's pupils shook. The people looking this way. Their gazes. In between them, he searched for a striking face. If it was Zeus, he would be shining brightly even among this crowd. You won't be able to find him even if you look for him. He's hiding on purpose. Why is he hiding? Just from me. The Zeus that Yuan knew wasn't someone who would be scared of him. No matter how quickly Yuan became stronger, he still wasn't comparable to Zeus. It's not because of you. Then, there's something like that. Meaningful words. Yuan reached out to the coffee that Hargan had been drinking. He took a sip of the coffee that was half remaining, moistening his mouth, and looked around. Flick. Crimson eyes. Hua and Jiamjung searched for Zeus's location. Strangely, he couldn't find him no matter how much he searched. Then suddenly, swoosh, he looked up and saw above him. It's far from nearby, above the clouds. He was looking down at them from the sky above, as if he were a god. That was Zeus. He was always arrogant, and he had the skills to match his arrogance. And that's why Yuan had come to find Zeus. Of course. He hadn't expected him to be with Hargan. Are you okay? Me? Why? Are you being threatened or something? Yuan looked back and forth between Zeus and Hargan. Zeus has lost his thunderbolt. And Hargan is a small piece of that thunderbolt. If Zeus had wanted to regain his thunderbolt in the first place, he would have come to Yuan. But when Zeus suddenly disappeared, Yuan thought he wasn't very interested in the thunderbolt. That's why he hadn't thought about the connection between Hargan and Zeus. But Zeus had come looking for a piece much smaller than the one Yuan had. Yuan thought that maybe he had tried to take the piece from Hargan, who was easy to handle. But fortunately, Hargan shook his head. There's no such thing. Hargan, who answered like that, soon muttered with a slightly tired face. I'm having a hard time. A hard time. I'm getting scolded a lot these days. A charred mark was visible on the back of Hargan's neck as he smiled awkwardly. It seemed like he knew what it meant to get scolded. It was unexpected. That's Zeus, to Hargan. A father is a father. He might not be like that to other guys, but he was different to Hargan. It seemed that even Zeus had paternal love. No, actually, I don't really believe it. Yuan leaned back in his chair. Zeus was nearby. He was a little relieved to have confirmed that. More than anything, the biggest gain was that he had confirmed that he was not hostile to him. What does that guy want? Zeus had reached out to him first through Hargan. He had first emerged from under the water and reached out to Yuan. It meant that he wanted something. I have something to ask of you. Really? Yuan put his hands on the table. That's funny. So do I. You do. What Zeus wants is to regain his strength, right? Hargan's golden eyes glinted. The magic power surrounding the two of them wavered. Yuan realized that his words and voice were being transmitted to Zeus through this magic power. So from now on, he was talking to Zeus, not Hargan. I know how. At that moment, crash, there was a loud thunderclap, loud enough to be heard through the thick walls. As if to penetrate the thick walls, a loud thunder rang out. Instead of a complicated explanation, Zeus went straight to the point of what he wanted. Yuan waited with his arms crossed, for Zeus to react to his words. Crunch, crunch, the crowd that had gathered around them split to the left and right. A man with a striking appearance, his face pale, walked through the middle. Thud, thud, his face was exactly like Hargan's right before his eyes. As if time had passed and Hargan had become an adult, he would have looked like that. Yuan asked Zeus, who had come right next to him and snatched the coffee that Hargan had left behind and drank it. Aren't you making too much of a scene? What I said earlier. Crunch. His golden eyes sparkled as an uncontrollable electric shock ran through his body. Explain properly. It was unexpectedly too noticeable. Yuan moved. The location was the rooftop of the building. It was a place where entry was normally prohibited. However, Zeus was forceful. Get out of the way. The players guarding the rooftop were bewildered. Their representative, the ranker, was just as perplexed. But, if you don't move, crackle, light poured out of Zeus's golden eyes. I'll tear this place down. No, the ranker waved his hands and stepped back. His opponent was Zeus, one of the beings at the apex of this tower. Since it was Zeus who was uttering those words, they wouldn't be a mere bluff. He really did possess the power to tear down this massive building. Good. Having pushed back the guards with his words, Zeus took a step as if it were nothing. Yu-won followed behind Zeus and looked at his back. A broad back, overbearing and majestic, that was Yu-won's thought about Zeus. There's no one here, there's nothing to be seen. An empty rooftop, it was a place so high that even the clouds could be seen below. In this place, there was no need to be conscious of other people's gazes. Zeus finally turned his body to talk to Yu-won. And then, what is it that you don't want to be seen by? He asked about what Yu-won was thinking of. Is it the guy I'm thinking of? Probably. Yu-won nodded, and his eyes met Zeus's. And at that moment, Indra, the two of them uttered the same name at the same time. The corners of Zeus's mouth went up. As expected. Yu-won didn't disappoint him. And Yu-won thought the same. Did he really think this far? After hearing that Zeus had come to find Hargan, and after confirming that Zeus's goal wasn't himself. He had a hunch. There was only one method that he could think of for him to restore his strength. Since we think alike, it will be easy to talk. There was no need to beat around the bush. Zeus spoke of his intentions without any need for a roundabout explanation. I plan on catching Indra. If I catch that guy, it'll be enough to supplement the thunderbolt you have. Why go through all that trouble? That guy must be a much more difficult opponent than me. There are two reasons. Zeus briefly glanced towards the room where Hargan was. One is that he's still that guy's friend. What's the second? It's not beneficial for me to make you my enemy. I don't know about the first one, but the second one is understandable. The two of them had the same goal. To draw out the foolish chaos and catch that guy. And at least until they achieve that goal, the two of them could be beings that could lend strength to each other. At least the Zeus that Wu-yun knew was someone who pursued practicality over emotions. He probably had a picture in his mind of how to catch the foolish chaos. And Wu-yun would probably be a part of that picture. Are we both drawing the same picture? He was inwardly surprised. Wu-yun knew the future. Also, a lot of time and manpower had been invested to draw this picture. Such a difficult picture to make. And yet Zeus had drawn it all on his own, without a clockwork or the help of others. It was a short conversation, but it was the first time he had a proper conversation with Zeus. And in that conversation, Wu-yun couldn't help but revise his judgment on Zeus that he had known. It's more than just a quantified ranking. Rank 9. After losing his thunderbolt, his rank had dropped to the double digits, but Wu-yun thought that ranking was ridiculously low. He already possessed greater strength than the given ranking. It was a situation where it wouldn't be strange if his rank rose at any moment. Furthermore, looking at how he had come up with another means to replace his lost thunderbolt and even figured out a way to obtain it, it wouldn't be strange if his rank entered the top 10 right now. So, the goal is set, but do you have a method? He wondered. Exactly how did he plan on catching Indra? To that question, Zeus answered without changing his expression. Heavenly Star, can you get him to move? Heavenly Star. The strongest ally that Wu-yun had. Also, an opponent that even Zeus acknowledged. I need his help too. This task wouldn't have been possible without his help in the first place. As expected, don't worry about that. This time too, Wu-yun and Zeus's thoughts coincided. That guy, right after Ragnarok ended, Wu-yun had asked Sun Ogong for one favor. He's already moving, a question he had initially asked to see what Zeus was thinking. Anyway, this was enough to convince him. The former king of Olympus, Zeus. Wu-yun's eyes sparkled as he looked at him. I'm taking this guy with me. Chapter 285. HMPH. Sun Wukong rubbed his nose while sneezing. He wondered who might be talking about him. Then, his ears started to itch, and Sun Wukong stopped in his tracks. Is this for sure? The sneeze that wouldn't come out was followed by itchy ears. His animalistic intuition was screaming that someone was talking about him. However, whether that was true or not. Hiss. Sun Wukong looked up at the acidic liquid that had fallen below. Hey, Vritra, growl. His eyes gleamed scarlet. He was still wary of Sun Wukong. It seemed like a breath attack could come out of his mouth at any moment. The blue sky and the green land. The enormous crater in the middle of it was Vritra's home. Don't look at me like that. Don't you also want to try fighting me again? Sun Wukong tried his best to keep his hands from going to the Rui bang on his back. He wanted to fight Vritra again right now. However, that wasn't his purpose for coming here. If you're not here to fight, then why did you come all this way? To stop the division. Vritra raised his enormous body as if he wanted a detailed explanation and looked down at Sun Wukong. What do you mean? I don't have the eloquence to explain it in detail. I'm just delivering a message. Are you saying that the Jade Emperor is above you? Not above, but beside. Sun Wukong's eyes rolled left and right as he answered confidently, as if he was puzzled. Isn't that right? In any case, it sounds like the one who told you that is separate. Yes, that's right, that's it. But, well, division, it's not something I really understand. Growl. Vritra lowered his head, and Sun Wukong's face was reflected in his eyes. All I know is that you guys are a threat to us. It had already been thousands of years since the dragons had stopped being active in the tower. And Vritra was the leader who had led such dragons in the shadows. It was natural for him to be wary of Sun Wukong. Is that why you joined hands with the foolish darkness? As if he knew everything, Sun Wukong looked at Vritra with a smirk. Vritra didn't deny it, to fight against the humans. He had woken up from his long slumber and joined hands with the foolish darkness. However, didn't I tell you before? That guy's goal. I've heard of him. I don't believe it all yet, though. The foolish chaos was neither human nor dragon. Its existence could not be explained within the framework of race. Vritra, who was not human, decided to join hands with the foolish chaos and fight against humans. However, if his goal is the destruction of everything, regardless of race, then it's impossible to join hands with him. Vritra was also suspicious of the foolish chaos. We have no intention of fighting you. Rather, we are more inclined to join hands with you. Sun Wukong, who said so, uttered the message he had received from Yuan. We will catch the dragon hunters for you. Dragon hunters. The cause of the initial conflict between humans and dragons. Nevertheless, no one could kill them, as they were immortal beings. Sun Wukong said that he would catch him. Dragon hunter. The word was hard to swallow. Vritra exhaled hot breath. Vritra's crimson eyes flashed as he raised his huge body. I understand that the foolish chaos is an untrustworthy guy. I was also half-hearted about it. Ku-gu-gu-gu. An ominous magical power erupted. Sun Wukong felt anger in the magical power he felt from Vritra. But that doesn't mean I trust you. The sky turned red. The ground burned hot. Sun Wukong reached for the Rui Jingu bang on his back. What he said is true. Let's talk first. Of course, it probably won't end with a conversation. If it had been a place where they should never have fought in the first place, Yuan would not have sent Sun Wukong. The dragon's anger towards humans had been building up for thousands of years. Yuan did not think that their backs would turn to normal with just a few words. And that's why he was able to send Sun Wukong on this mission. Then, sometimes a fist is needed when a conversation doesn't work. Let's break a few things and talk again. Indra is not immortal. Indra, the sixth ranker. He wielded lightning attribute magical power, and was known to the world as an immortal being like Sun Wukong. Of course, that was wrong information. He just has multiple lives. Immortality doesn't mean not dying, but being able to come back to life after dying. Thud, Yuan, Zeus, and Hargan moved forward. Behind them, the building they had just been in loomed high. The three of them came to a forest outside the city. As they moved, Zeus continued to explain Indra to Yuan. So, it's not impossible to catch him. The Ranking Management Bureau had measured Indra's rank as 6th. In terms of destructive power alone, Indra was comparable to Surtur. On top of that, he was immortal. It was an unbelievable rank. Surtur's high rank is due to the flames he possesses, the power he exerts from his enormous body, and his defense, which is comparable to Heracles. Immortality was a huge merit in battle. If one fought while ignoring death, the range of strategies and tactics would be greatly expanded. One could also prepare for the next time after defeat. Naturally, the ranking had to reflect that to a considerable degree. Yet, Indra's rank was 2 levels lower than Surtur's. That was why Zeus questioned Indra's immortality. But this is unexpected. Zeus turned his head slightly and looked at Yuan. I may have my own desires, but for you to cooperate in such a thing. The Yuan he knew did not intervene or get involved in unnecessary matters. Yet, that Yuan had come forward first and offered to cooperate in catching Indra. There had to be a reason. Perhaps he desired power like himself, or perhaps he desired something else. Is there a reason why you have to kill him? A subtle question. Yuan nodded. It wasn't anything he needed to keep a secret, and he had plenty of reasons. It's because of his title. Title: Dragon Slayer, Indra. Dragon Slayer. It was a title that Indra had earned since long ago. It was a title given to those who had killed countless members of the dragon clan, just like the giant slayer Heracles. In other words, Indra was nothing less than a natural enemy and nemesis to the dragon clan. So, you're saying you're going to catch him for the dragon clan? That's right, I understand what you're saying, but I don't know why. I understand what you mean, but I don't know why. They were like a tribe that served and worshipped Indra. Even though they had the same goal, the reasons why the two were fighting were completely different. If Yuan's answer was true, there was only one thing he wanted. Are you trying to achieve world peace? Humans and dragons. The two races were at odds, and the dragons had begun to show hostility towards humans. Yuan wanted to cut that off right away. Not peace, but preservation of power. Power. Do you think there is only one great chaos? Zeus, who had been leading Yuan, stopped in his tracks. He felt like he had been hit in the head with a hammer. The great chaos. Where it came from, what its true nature was, what its purpose was. No one knew anything about this enigmatic being. Yuan's words, that there might be more than one such being, were enough to shock Zeus. Zeus, who had stopped for a moment, started moving again. How much do you know about that guy? It was a difficult question. The only one who knew the answer to this at this point was Son Goku. Many people knowing about it was not good. That's why he tried to hide it as much as possible. That guy is going to destroy the tower. From now on, it wouldn't be bad to reveal some information. Other than that, I don't know much. What kind of guy he is. It wasn't a lie. The outer gods, who were outside the tower and from that world, were beings that even Yuan and his companions, who had been fighting for a long time, did not understand. Tisk. Zeus clicked his tongue, not having received the answer he wanted. How long had they been walking like that? Rustle. There was a sign of life among the bushes. Chi-chi-chi-chi-chi-chi-chit. The magic power emitted from Zeus's body enveloped the bodies of the three people, including Yuan and Hargan. The golden magic power created a space that was cut off from the outside. In an instant, all colors were sucked into the magic power, and the inside and outside were cut off. I found them. The sound of people gathering. Hundreds of players moved along the path through the forest. People with peculiar paintings on their faces like Indians and their blue hair tied up. There were also rankers mixed in among them. A player from the 79th floor has that many people, including rankers. It was the size of a mid-sized guild. They are the Dragon Hunters. Dragon Hunters. It was a title that referred to Indra. Also, is it the Indra clan? They were a kind of tribe that served and worshipped Indra. Rankers and players who fight against the dragons with Indra. They aren't registered as a guild, but their numbers and strength are greater than most large guilds. The existence of Indra and the Indra tribe distanced humans and dragons. Because of that, Odin had thought of the Indra tribe as a nuisance for a long time. However, it was difficult to take action against them. The Indra tribe isn't just a simple guild or group. Rather, it's closer to a kind of religion, like the Cheonma Divine Church. The Cheonma Divine Church was a religious group centered around Cheonma. Rather than being gathered for profit, their solidarity was bound to be much stronger. In order to stop them, there was no choice but to completely eradicate the entire Indra tribe, root and stem. However, considering their numbers, that would be difficult. Then, the only way would be to kill Indra, their leader, but that was known to be impossible. Because to the outside world, Indra was an immortal being. There will be a fight with the Indra tribe in a few days. At Zeus's words, Wu Jin turned to look at him. Are you trying to draw out Indra? Yes, it had been quite some time since Indra had been active. And that went the same for the Indra tribe. However, the situation was different now than before. It probably won't be difficult. The dragons are starting to move as well. Zeus continued, looking at the Indra tribe that was growling and moving. They are proof of that. The fact that the Indra tribe was moving meant that their god, Indra, was also starting to move. Since he had found the Indra tribe as he had thought, it wouldn't be that difficult to draw out Indra. However, this is strange. Wu Jin felt something sense of dissonance from the Indra tribe that appeared before his eyes. Even if they are the Indra tribe who live a tribal life, it's strange that this much force has gathered when the dragons haven't even appeared. Swish, whoosh, Wu Jin's eyes turned red and flared. The direction the Indra tribe was headed. At the end of it, a familiar face was seen. As I thought, it means there's another enemy. He thought that they had prepared to fight someone. And that opponent was, as expected, Asura, the natural enemy of the Indra tribe. The six-armed, three-headed Asura. Far away, he was standing there, blocking the path of the Indra tribe. Chapter 286. Buarata Marqueta, Matar Guo. Tao, the Indras communicated with one another in their own language. Instead of being bewildered at discovering Asura, they each equipped their weapons and gathered their magical power in preparation for battle. Devi gathered to fight Asura. He was knowledgeable of the relationship between Asura and the Indras. Asura, who held a grudge towards the Indras, had been battling them for quite a while. I haven't komato sial today, Jabug. Despite his words, Asura continued walking. Of course, that doesn't menial jusel tupus, Sukik. Asurans had that his weapon, not just own. 2. Asuraustas were dandanax. 2 heads. Yuan looked at Asura's arms, tricephalachexabrachia. It was a description that perfectly described his appearance, a not tribute that was always with Asura. The stronger the opponent Asura confronted, the more heads and arms on his body would appear. Own head and donirm, it mean that wasn't using much of his power. Well, Indra himself hasn't come forward. He may not have known how the Indras viewed Asura, but Yuan was aware of his fear. Hawasa monster in fight. No matter how talented Susanu's swordsmanship was, he couldn't compare to Sora. After all, Asura isn't just good with Asword. Hesherankurwo has perfected every type of weapon. Yuan had learned how to handle weapons from him. Blame your unlucky fate for your death. The moment Asura brandished his weapons. Tarama, Tarama. The Indras began charging at Asura. Tuwakwik, a collision between the many and the one. The Indras' arms, legs, and heads were flying into the sky. Asura had infiltrated the middle of them, dancing wildly, and the Indras flew toward him, ignoring death. The Indras are brave, religion and belief. It is the only way to overcome the fear of death. That was why the Indras were such fearsome beings. However, they are in a different from us. No matter how many mobs gathered, they couldn't put out a large forest fire. Their fundamentally different sizes were the problem. Choke. Blood sprayed into the sky, creating earth mist. The Hairdargan's voice Sasha whispered while watching the scene unfold. When I was young, my mother would often tell me ghost stories to scare me. It was common. It was a prank adults used to play scared children. People usually forget the sea's stories as he grow older, but the fears of the childhood aren't easily forgotten. However, the ghost I heard about back then was less frightening than this. Hargan felt that Asura, who he could see in front of him, was more frightening than the ghost they had thought of back then. Zeus felt a similar way, although to a lesser degree. Hesh better thani haired. Zeus had climbed higher than Asura. Despite this, he couldn't help but be impressed by the display of skill in front of him. Asura had into Sidon unique skills her own mighty show of power to overwhelm his opponents. It was imply technique. He had never imagined that his word and a mace could be handled so excellently. It wasn't for nothing that Asura's name was renowned in this tower. Pook. Asura's spear pierced throat her ranking and draw house left. Asura, who had pierced throat a center of his opponent's heart, asked the ranker who had been impaled. Has Indra begun moving? A considerable amount of time had passed since Indra had gone into hiding. After the dragon Sarenkadal fallen into sleep, Indra had quietly disappeared. But for so large amounts of Indras be moving around, it wasn't a normal event. Rakuma, Tarkala, what are you saying? Kill. From the mouth of the Indra clan's ranker came words that were not of the Indra clan. It was not an answer to the question. Asura's hand was relentless. Then, Puhahk. The spear that had been lodged in his chest was pulled out. A spray of blood gushed over Asura's face. Asura retrieved the spear without avoiding the blood, and the ranker's body collapsed next to him. Thud, he was the last one. Asura did not put away his spear. Instead, his gaze turned to where Yuan, Zeus, and Hargan were standing. I came looking for fun, and I met these guys again. Asura, with blood on his face, raised the corners of his mouth. Come out, Kim Yuan. Cheek, he pointed the tip of his sword at Yuan. Zeus used his skill to hide his appearance, but it seemed that he could not fool Asura's eyes. Yuan and Zeus looked at each other. Then, what can I do? Zeus shrugged his shoulders and released his skill. Pajijik, the barrier of mana that had surrounded the three of them dispersed. Asura raised the corners of his mouth as he slowly revealed the three of them. From that expression, Yuan could tell why Asura had come here. He came after me. It was not so strange that Asura was after him. He always wanted to stick with a newly named high ranker. Because of that personality, Asura was so focused on fighting that even the battle-loving Son Goku would say that he was a nobleman compared to Asura. And Yuan agreed to some extent. He came quickly. Yuan did not know when Asura had become interested in him, but it would not have been strange if he had come from anywhere at any time. Is it because of Shukuchi? Shukuchi. It was a Taoist technique derived from the Murim world's Taoism. It was a skill that was widely known by name, but in reality, there were few who could use it. However, as far as Yuan knew, there was one. There was a ranker who used the Shukuchi. He's good at stealing and learning skills from various places. Asura's talent was among the best of all the high rankers that Yuan knew. Especially when it came to learning the martial arts of the Murim world, Asura's talent was truly unique. He was the only one in this tower who had mastered the Shukuchi method. I came looking for you. Jebek. Asura walked over the corpses. Not these leftovers. Leftovers. It was a word that referred to the dozens of rankers and hundreds of upper-level players. It was an arrogant word, but he had enough qualifications to say such a thing. Fight me. Your personality hasn't changed even after being scolded by the administrator. Asura's brow twitched at Yuan's words. Soon, his figure disappeared from the spot. Zing. Pajijijij. In an instant, his spear and Zeus's lightning bolt collided. Kwa Jajij. Asura, pushed by the force of the lightning, supported his body by stabbing his sword into the ground. He raised his head and looked at Zeus. Why didn't you find me sooner? If you had, I wouldn't have stopped you. Zeus narrowed his eyes, his golden eyes glinting. I don't like it, but you're on my side for now. Oh, the guy who used to be so picky when he was an enemy had now become a reliable ally. Yuan was impressed by that reliability. On the other hand, Asura smiled with a murderous face. Zeus, I heard you were crazy, but you still recognize my face. I heard that you lost your power, were imprisoned in Asgard's prison, and crawled out of there disgracefully. Even with Asura's provocation, Zeus did not lose his smile. Rather, he clicked his tongue and shook his head. Indeed, the pride of the truly strong and noble cannot be wounded by the gossip of the lowly. Thud. Zeus took a step toward Asura. You have lost much of your power, but do not mistake yourself for my equal. Oh really? The face of a child who has found an interesting new toy. Asura smiled, revealing his sharp fangs. Then let's see about that. The hands holding the sword were filled with power. Behind him, crimson energy burst forth, and the stench of blood spread in all directions. You will only know the difference if we fight, so it is foolish to talk about it. Crackle. Lightning erupted from Zeus's hand. The energy of the two men clashed in the air. It would not be strange if either of them moved first and the battle began. And at that moment, Asura's expression changed. No. I told you, didn't I? Whoosh. Another, second head appeared. Don't get distracted from the fight. Unlike the Asura from before, this one had a calm and composed face. Asura replied to that face. How can I resist such delicious prey? His opponent was none other than Zeus. His original purpose was to find Yuan, but he was not one to let such an opponent pass him by. If he simply let it go, he would not be Asura. You are not prey. Now. That's enough. Swish. Asura flicked the blood off his sword and his eyes gleamed. I think I'll fight both of you at once. Both of you. Yuan and Zeus. Asura's first head intended to face both of them. The second head sighed as if it had expected this and shook its head. Unlike the first head, the second head was not as aggressive. Asura did not back down. And of course, Zeus was not the type to back down either. I guess I have no choice. Yuan turned and looked at Hargan. Let's get out of here. Run away. It'll only be a nuisance if we stay here. Yuan's words crumpled Hargan's face, which had been wounded by his pride. He meant to run away so as not to get caught up in the fight. He wanted to argue back, but he couldn't. The battle between the two of them was truly a battle of the stars. At least Yuan had a foot in their circle, but Hargan did not. Hargan had seen Asura fight. Moreover, he knew that Asura's skills were not all that he had. Furthermore, he knew better than anyone else about Zeus's abilities. There's nothing I can do. For now, he had no choice but to admit it and back down. If he stayed here unnecessarily, he would only get in Zeus's way as he fought. Crackle. In the end, Hargan turned and left before the two men clashed. Hargan, who wielded lightning attribute energy, was faster than most high-ranking fighters. That was where Hargan disappeared. Unexpected. Crackle, crackle. Yuan looked at Asura, who had four arms extended along with his second head, as Zeus slowly began to gather his energy. These two going head-to-head is Zeus and Asura. It was not common to see a fight between two high-ranking fighters who had reached the top. Especially for Yuan, who was trying to bring Zeus completely to his side, this was an opportunity to see Zeus's abilities after he had lost his thunderbolt. Furthermore, I might be able to calm that crazy bastard down. Yuan's gaze turned to Asura. Asura, the high ranker who had taught him how to wield a weapon. The first thing he needed to do when he met him was to calm down his excitement and fighting spirit, which had flared up. Chapter 287. Shallow Chatter. Sun Ogong chuckled. Asura, who had been sitting quietly like a stone Buddha on one side throughout the meeting, contorted his face. Shut up, monkey. What the hell, monkey, who's talking nonsense? It hurts more because it's true. Regardless of his mood, Asura did not deny Sun Ogong's words. Perhaps the most dangerous guy of all. Asura's impulsive actions in the past were just as variable. There was no regularity in his actions, making them difficult to predict. The first head is definitely not well controlled, you see. Asura has 3 heads. The most active of them was the first head. The second head sometimes controlled him, but well. If it had been properly controlled, Asura would not have been notorious in the tower. What were you doing then? It was Odin's question, recalling Asura's past notoriety. Then, Asura sighed and raised his head. I was sleeping. You slept. I hardly ever woke up, you see. So, what, are you saying there's no way to stop it? Nothing you can do about it? When Sun Ogong asked in frustration, Asura, who had been thinking for a while, opened his mouth. The way to stop the first me will be surprisingly easy. He, who attended the meeting, Asura was the last of the 3 Asuras. He was the 3rd Asura. Zeus disappeared into the sky. A light flashed in the sky. At that moment, Wu Wen raised his cold hand holding Uranus's heart. The next moment, flash, a huge light engulfed the sky. Boom, with the sound of thunder, lightning struck down. Crackle, a lightning bolt poured down on Asura's head. Although he had lost his thunderbolt, Zeus was Zeus. Asura, who took out 2 heads, crossed his forearms and blocked it with difficulty. Even the aftereffects made Wu Wen's body tingle. This is how much power you've lost. The figure of Zeus rising in the sky was reflected in the mirror of Wan Jiamzhang. He's great, indeed. In his prime, he had the power to wipe out an entire city with just 1 thunderbolt. Like the thunderbolt that had struck Camelot. Compared to that time, the power of the thunderbolt now was certainly weak. Of course, there was a difference. Crack, crackle. Unlike the thunderbolt that was dropped to destroy Camelot whole, the thunderbolt that now struck Asura's head was closer to the form of a spear. The more the power is concentrated in one point, the stronger and sharper it becomes. The spear eventually pierced Asura's arm. Crack. The ground on which he was standing collapsed. Boom. A lightning bolt buried Asura deep in the ground. Zeus struck another sharp and powerful spear on top of it. Boom. The thunder was so loud that his ears were ringing. Wu Wen used Uranus's heart to block the lightning that spread to him and looked in the direction of Asura. Were 4 arms not enough? In the end, Asura fell to his knees and collapsed. Thud. Zeus descended back to the ground. A smoking crater. The moment Zeus approached it. Crack. An arm sprang up from the ground. Roar. Asura's hand reached out to Zeus. The rough hands grabbed his neck, and the other hands raised their weapons. However, crackle. Zeus's figure disappeared in a golden light within Asura's hands. Boom. A yellow lightning bolt engulfed Asura's body. Asura staggered in shock with the light that burst out for a moment. Shallow talk. Crack. Zeus descended. Did you think I wouldn't know you were hiding underground, waiting for me to come down? You must not be confident enough to approach me. Well, the distance between the 2 men narrowed. Swish. Buzz. Quote exclamation mark quote. Asura's eyes flashed. Before he knew it, he was floating upwards against his will. Zeus's hand grabbed his neck and lifted him up. Don't you dare judge me. Crackle, crackle, bang. Asura was slammed into the ground with an electric shock through his hand. It didn't matter if the distance was long or short. In the first place, distance only has meaning when the skills are on a somewhat equal footing. However, there was such a difference between the 2 that distance was meaningless. The gap between Zeus and Asura was that wide. Even Eugene was surprised. I didn't think the guy with 2 heads would be pushed this far. Zeus, who had lost his thunderbolt. That was why Eugene had secretly underestimated Zeus's abilities a little. In fact, in his fight with Zeus, he had become drastically weaker since losing his thunderbolt. Naturally, Eugene had been thinking of Zeus based on his abilities at that time. Have you adapted? For Zeus, losing his thunderbolt was like losing an arm. And it was his right hand, which he had used all his life. The battle at that time had taken place when Zeus had just lost his thunderbolt. Naturally, he couldn't have had enough time to adapt to his lost power. But now it was different. If the Bureau of Management sees this fight, Zeus's ranking might go up again. His skills were that great. Of course, Asura is the same, though. Snap, the ground where Zeus had stabbed Asura split open. Asura, who was caught in his hand, squirmed. Above the two heads, a third head faintly began to emerge. All the heads came out. No, as the last head coming out. Asura's third, the one Eugene knew was coming out. Crackle, crackle, electricity flowed from Zeus's hand. He instinctively recognized the danger to his third head as well. But at that moment, screech, a long wound appeared on Zeus's face. Surprised, Zeus dropped his hand from his neck and stepped back. With a streak of light, Zeus appeared quite a distance away, and Asura's fifth hand slashed where Zeus had been just a moment ago. Drip, blood ran down his cheek. Zeus wiped the blood away with his hand. I forgot that he had 6 arms. It was carelessness. Having said that, the sword Asura had just swung was faster than he had imagined. Zeus looked at Asura, who had risen from his seat. 3 heads, and 6 arms. They call you the 3-headed, 6-armed monster. 3-headed, 6-armed. The title Asura had been called since he began to make a name for himself climbing the tower. You live up to your name. The atmosphere was completely different from before. The guy who had been violent and unrestrained, even though he was strong, had suddenly changed into a completely different person. It was a different feeling from when the second head had come out. You've become a little more useful. The corners of Zeus's mouth went up. Finally, the third head had come out. The real fight started now. Crackle, the electricity that had been pouring out of Zeus's body intensified. Electricity gathered in his hand and turned into a spear. It seemed like the spear would be thrown with all his might at any moment. The third head emerged completely. Just as the two were about to clash again. Thud, Eugene walked between them. That's far enough. Zeus's eyebrows twitched at the sudden intervention. Get out of the way. We're thinking the same thing this time. Asura's eyes flashed. Get out of the way. If you don't want to get hurt. The murderous intent of the two men poured out at the same time. It was enough to make anyone standing in the middle shudder. However, he had no intention of backing down. Wu Wan turned his head and looked at Asura. Are you here to fight me? So what if I am? Those eyes seemed to be asking if he was ready to fight right now. Wu Wan shrugged at Asura's eyes, which were filled with fighting spirit. I'm a little tired right now. Asura's eyebrows twitched. His face was filled with dissatisfaction. Tired? I just finished a big test. It's hard to fight properly. His stamina had recovered for now, but that didn't mean he was in top condition. If he could, he would have liked to take a deep breath and get some rest. It's not like I can't fight, though. Wu Wan watched Asura's conflicted expression. That must be a real turn-off for him. Asura's goal was fun. Fighting against strong and interesting opponents. That was why Asura had come to Wu Wan. But now, the prey that had been so plump was all dried up. His hunting instincts would inevitably cool down. The problem is Zeus. Would he try to stop this fight? He turned his head and looked at Zeus. Surprisingly, he had already stopped gathering his magical power. As expected, Zeus was a man of great pride. He had thought that he would be obsessed with seeing the end, but I have no intention of getting caught up in a fight that I can't win. I'm not as crazy about fighting as that guy. Is that so? That was good news. He had calmed Asura down a little, and Zeus wasn't very interested in fighting Asura in the first place. This way, the situation would more or less calm down. Wu Wan, who no longer had to worry about Zeus, looked back at Asura. I have a proposal. A proposal. His face was full of suspicion. However, the third face, which had appeared last, had its eyes sparkling. Let's hear it. There are two. Postpone your fight with me. Not until my body has recovered, but for a few years. At those words, the first head suddenly asked. Why should I do that? A conversation with 3 people. Fortunately, Asura's personality was quite simple. Because I'll be stronger by then. Asura's eyes sparkled. Not the other heads, but the first head with the most aggressive personality. How many years will you need? 3 years will be enough. There was a brief silence. It seemed that the 3 Asuras were talking among themselves. And then, can you promise? Asura had taken the bait that Wu Wan had thrown out. Yes, I promise. He had no intention of breaking his promise. If Asura really came to fight him in 3 years, he would answer. What's the second one? Isn't there a more important opponent than fighting me? Wu Wan's gaze swept over the ground. The corpses that had turned black from the aftermath of the fight with Zeus. The Indras. Their existence was an unerasable wound to Asura, a sore past that was like touching a tiger's whiskers. That's why Wu Won said, "We're going to lure out Indra." He could make this offer to Asura. The Asuras, expressions hardened. Indra, the moment that name left Wu Won's mouth. What did you just say? Are you in? If Indra moves, Asura will definitely move. That's why he didn't think he needed to go looking for him. Thankfully, he showed up in front of me like this. Wu Won reached out to Asura. Things will be a little easier. Chapter 288. A short but not insubstantial conversation ensued. The first Asura had ranted at length, the second had remained silent, and the third, who controlled the other two, made the decision. Let's come back for him later. He spoke as if he could find Yu Won whenever he pleased. And Yu Won had no reason to doubt him. Whatever. The blink he had mastered allowed him to move freely throughout the tower. He may not have been the fastest in a fight, but when it came to traversing long distances, he was unmatched. Blink. As the Asura took a single step, his form vanished from where he stood. So that's Blink, Zeus muttered in admiration. Despite his high rank in the tower, Blink was a skill even he rarely saw. Yu Won looked back at Zeus at his mutterings. You seem to know a lot about Asuras. When the Asuras had first appeared, Zeus had charged at him without hesitation. That was unlike the Zeus that Yu Won knew. I know about the relationship between Asura and Indra. As was always the case, there was a reason behind Zeus's actions. I'll have to see how strong he is. If he's useful or not. Verification. As someone meeting Asura for the first time, Zeus needed to know his abilities. Rank was determined by a variety of factors. Strength, position, reputation, influence. But all Zeus cared about was strength. Asura's goal is Indra. He trained and trained to catch that guy. Fighting strong opponents was just part of that training. He knew more than Yu Won thought. Why was Zeus interested in Asura? Zeus answered Yu Won's unspoken question. I'm planning to catch Indra too. The same goal. That meant they could potentially be on the same side. Zeus didn't rule out the possibility. Asura must have been thinking about that when he came here. I didn't think he'd show up right in front of me like this. Zeus grinned, showing his white teeth. Things were going more smoothly than he had planned. And Yu Won felt the same way. It was ironic. The more he saw of Zeus up close, the more he realized. The more Indra looked at Zeus up close. The power he sensed from the guy made Indra gather lightning in his hands again. There was one thought that bothered him, unfortunately. He's similar to me, in the way he thinks and acts. There were too many similarities. Did Zeus realize it as well? Yu Won pondered for a moment before starting to walk. The plan remains the same. As expected, yes, since Asura has been added. Thud, thud, Zeus accepted the words as if it was obvious. Thud, the dragon that had lost its wings fell to the ground. A man with long, unkempt blue hair looked at the fallen dragon. He was only wearing pants, with nothing covering his upper body. Bring me your brethren. The dragon bared its teeth at the emotionless voice. Even though it had lost both of its wings, the dragon's fighting spirit remained. Impossible. Beg for your life. You might be able to live. I can't sell out my brethren just to save myself. The dragon sneered as it looked at the man in its eyes. I'm not like you, Indra. The man's forehead twitched. But only for a moment. Indra lifted his bent body and looked up at the sky. Unfortunately for you, Kya, a shriek echoed from the sky. Soon, a flock of black beings could be seen through the clouds. Looks like I'm too late. Why on earth? Thud. It was the same on the ground. A group of dragons with 2 legs and wings approached. And between them, tisk, tisk, tisk. There was a monster that exuded an overwhelming presence. Fafnir. The corners of Indra's lips curled up. Crackle. Blue lightning erupted from his body as he revealed his white teeth. The moment he saw Fafnir in the middle of the dragons, Indra became certain. Have they finally started to move? The dragons that had been hiding and avoiding him until now were starting to move. Crackle, crackle. The lightning that had been spread out around Indra gathered at his fingertips. Come at me, with madness in his grin. Crackle, crackle. Indra's hand shot forward, and lightning burst from his fingertips. Boom, blue lightning swept across the ground. The dragons were swept away by the wave of lightning, as if being swept away by a strong wave. Indra's lightning made the dragon's tough scales meaningless, and only one survived. Creak, the leader of the dragons. Fafnir. Indra gathered electricity in his hand once again at the mana he felt from the guy. Creak, it seems like it's starting again from today. The corners of Indra's mouth rose as his blue eyes sparkled. Dragon hunting. Yuan returned to the city after meeting the Asura following the Indra tribe. Yuan found a place to stay and took a break for the day before finding the training ground again. This time, he wasn't holding a sword, but a spear. Thud. Yuan looked around the inside of the training ground as soon as he stepped inside. The training ground was as large as a small island. He had been here a few times before, but he was always amazed by its size. The 79th floor training ground is known as one of the most intense in the tower. It's designed to withstand the training intensity of several high rankers, so it should be fine. The best part of this place was that it was completely sealed off from the outside. The impact from inside the training ground didn't reach the outside, and he didn't have to be conscious of other people's gazes. It was also large enough that he could do any kind of training he wanted. It was originally used for the training of large guilds, but Yuan had rented it out for the entire day today. It's pretty expensive, 100,000 points. It was the price of an item that even mid-rankers would use. Even for a rich person, it was a little painful to spend that much money for just one day of training. But it was worth it. Yuan looked at the spear in his hand. Near, an item that was half of Gingnir. Unlike Uranus's heart, which had been somewhat expected, this was an item that no one had expected. Of course, its abilities were unknown, and it wasn't in the plan. First, he had to get used to the item. He needed to know what kind of power it had and how to use it before he could use it in combat. Boom. The first thing he did was lightly swing it. It felt heavy. It was heavy enough that even mid-rankers wouldn't be able to use it easily. From the feel of it, it definitely wasn't a spear meant for swinging. Whoever designed the item, it was closer to a spear designed for throwing. Thinking only of the feeling of holding it and swinging it, one item came to mind. It's like Gingnir. Yuan had experience properly handling Gingnir. It wasn't just in this life. Before he used the clockwork to return, Yuan had borrowed Odin's Gingnir to throw it a few times during the fight with the outer gods. Yuan always carried an item that had Odin's energy within it to activate Gingnir, which reacted to Odin's energy. It was a strategy set up in case Odin couldn't throw Gingnir and needed someone else to throw it instead. But of course, the person who handled Gingnir the best was Odin. That was why Yuan never thought about getting his hands on Gingnir, no matter how tempted he was. Gingnir was at its best when it was in Odin's hands. That was why Yuan secretly wished there was another Gingnir. One swing of Gingnir can turn an unwinnable fight around. Clang. He gripped the Nir in his hand. Yuan remembered his fight with Surtur not too long ago. But it takes too long to activate. He needed time. The same went for using Nir. Crack, crackle. As he infused energy into the spear, it shook and began to react. Activating. Nir. Activation rate 1%. Activation rate 2%. Activation rate. Tisk, tisk tisk. The energy seeped into the spear and amplified itself. The reaction up to this point was no different from Gingnir. Screech. The energy amplified, and amplified again. The amplified energy didn't spread anywhere and instead gathered at the tip of the spear. To think that this much energy could be gathered in one item. The corners of Yuan's lips curled up. It's real. Nir, the other half of Gingnir. Unlike Gingnir, which had the attribute of lightning, the energy coming from Nir had the attribute of darkness. Thump, thump thump. His hand, which was holding the spear, was filled with an overwhelming amount of energy. He felt like he was going to drop the spear at any moment if he couldn't overcome it. The spear was getting heavier. It was difficult to keep going like this. Giant strength is imbued in your arms. The weight felt a little lighter. I need to reduce the activation time. Yuan had one thought in mind for his next move. Tartarus is released. Tisk, tisk tisk. He moved his hand, which was holding the spear, to the cold hand that held the heart of Uranus. Tartarus. Through this power, Yuan was able to handle the dark attribute mana. Tartarus, mana was a power that spewed from a place deeper than hell, so it helped control the mana flowing out of Nir. Thud, thud, like that, 3 minutes passed. Ignition rate 99%. Yuan decided on the direction to throw the spear. The direction was forward. Surely that won't happen. Considering the intensity of the training ground, it was absurd. This training ground was designed to withstand even the battles of high-ranking high rankers. But he couldn't be relieved. But if it's this. With this power, he felt like he could pierce through anything, even the training ground. That would be troublesome. If he accidentally aimed up or down and the spear pierced through the wall, the people in this building would be in danger. That was the reason why it had to go sideways, even if it pierced through the wall. And the next moment, Nir's ignition begins. Flash. Swallowing all the surrounding light, Nier left Yuan's hand. Obelisk, the center of the 79th floor, and one of the most notable structures in the tower. A place where millions of people wandered around in one building, it had a defense system that no rancor could shake. That was why everyone could walk around with peace of mind, and it was a representative tourist attraction on the 79th floor. Rumble, but in that place, a slight vibration occurred. What is that? Some kind of event? The faces of the guests who visited the obelisk brightened. The floating obelisk occasionally held events for its guests. It was a kind of party, inviting famous rankers to show off their flashy skills or spar. So at first, the confusion wasn't that great. Rather, some cheered and looked for the direction from which the vibration was felt. However, rumble, rumble, crack, the vibration became more and more intense, and cracks appeared on the walls of the obelisk, which had never even swayed before, let alone shattered. This is, rumble, rumble, not an event, is it? The faces of a few quick-witted players turned grim. Cracks were slowly forming in the place where they were standing. Chapter 289. Rumble. For a moment, Yuan stood rooted to the spot, gazing at the sky before him. A hole had been punched through the wall. It was a gigantic hole, large enough to take out an entire side of the wall. And beyond that hole, visible above the horizon, were thick clouds with an equally large hole in them. I had a feeling, but who would have thought this wall would actually be broken? Whoosh! Yuan looked at the spot where Nier had pierced through, using the remaining traces of magic power. The broken wall was smooth. It looked as if it hadn't been broken but had disappeared. Gingnir was an item with the power of lightning. On the other hand, Nier's attribute was the opposite, darkness. Since it possessed the power of annihilation and corrosion, a cross-section like this was only natural in a way. The power is as expected. Yuan's expectations for Nier matched Gingnir's exactly. Gingnir, the spear wielded by Odin, considered the strongest in this tower. Nier had just as much power as that. And that meant something else to Yuan. That the Gingnir he had so desperately wanted was now in his hands. As he stood there admiring the power of Nier for a moment. What happened here? Panting, the guide who had led Yuan into the training hall came running up. What did you do to it? She stood there, lost for words, looking at the sky visible through the hole in one side of the training hall wall. Her expression said it all. How could anyone do anything to make such a hole in the wall? Yuan, unable to find anything to say, avoided her gaze. Even he had a conscience, and he wasn't completely free of guilt for what had happened. I'll pay a little extra for the repairs. Do you know that this isn't the only one? There are cracks throughout all 5 floors, from top to bottom. Sorry, the guide rubbed her throbbing temples. This wasn't something a lowly employee like her could deal with, but she had been the one to bring Yuan here. As per regulations, if the training hall is damaged, we are responsible for it as the ones who failed to make the training hall sturdy enough. Her eyes fell on the hole that Yuan had punched. This case is just so ridiculous. The training hall was one that they had boasted would never be destroyed unless Odin came and threw Gingnir at it. But not only had the training hall been destroyed, an entire wall had been completely annihilated. No one had ever thought that something like this could happen. Meanwhile, swish, Nier flew back into Yuan's hand through the hole in the wall. Thud, imprinting complete. Nier recognizes its master. Activation conditions will be applied. Perfect. An item that only he could use. He couldn't have asked for more. Even the recall function is perfect. It required a little bit of focus, but it had all the necessary features for a javelin-type item. There was no more perfect item than this. It was exactly what Yuan needed. Was it that spear? Yuan forced down the corners of his mouth, which had started to curl up. He turned his head to see that a ranker from the obelisk, who had heard of the situation, had come inside. Yes, we'll take care of the repairs for now. But I'm afraid that from now on, Kim Yuan will not be able to use the training hall. His face was filled with worry and concern. It was an understandable measure. If Yuan were to use the training hall again and punched another hole in the wall, it would be a major problem. I'm sorry. It's fine. It's not the first time something like this has happened. Not the first time. Yuan made a curious expression. He knew quite a bit of history, but this was the first time he had heard of anything like this. But then again, I don't know everything. The information Yuan had gathered was only about plans necessary for the fight against the outer gods. The obelisk has collapsed once before. It was rebuilt so that something like this wouldn't happen again, but who did it? Several candidates came to mind. The most likely one was Odin. Like his Gingnir, his spear could destroy the obelisk. However, the name that came out of the administrator's mouth was different from what Eugene expected. It was Indra. Eugene left the training ground and headed to his room. He was about to fight the Indras soon. Since he was about to fight, he planned to rest for the rest of the time. That's how he got into his room. It was Indra. Eugene recalled what he had just heard from the obelisk's administrator. That wall. It was a story that made him think a lot, even though it was before he was strengthened. Indra. He was an opponent he had never fought or even met before. His opponent was Asura, not Eugene. There are more variables than I thought. Asura did not defeat Indra alone. Indra was weakened by the war with the dragons. Asura only won because he fought Indra when he was weakened. A rank 6 high ranker. He was not like Odin, who had a huge force called Asgard, but a guy who achieved that ranking with pure strength alone. Eugene assumed Indra's abilities through that ranking. However, it seemed that he had to change that assumption. Indra is a high ranker who hasn't been active for thousands of years. It's natural for that long hiatus to be reflected in the ranking. In spite of that, Indra's ranking did not change. Even during that long hiatus. After the dragons moved in Ragnarok, Indra breaks the hiatus and starts to move. Eugene began to gather information in his head. Indra's abilities. Indra's actions, goals, future trends. He wondered what the guy would be doing now. We're going to attack the Indras and lure out Indra. He thought it was a good idea. That thought had not changed even now. However, there was something that made him change his mind a little. The dragons might not be able to stop Indra. Ragnarok had come sooner than expected. Naturally, the dragons' activities started sooner because of that. Wang, just in time, the player kit rang. Indra has clashed with Fafnir. A text from Son Goku. Eugene's eyes widened. Eugene, who had returned to his room and lay down on the bed after the next message, got up. I let Britra go for now. What should I do? It seemed that he had to move a little earlier. Son Goku scratched his chin. On the moving somersault cloud, his gaze went to the player kit. There's no reply. There was no reply from Eugene. If he had checked, there should have been some contact. And that meant, he wants me to do what I want. It also meant that there was nothing special to be careful about. Son Goku's eyes sparkled. Soon, Britra's voice was heard. Why are you following me? Right after hearing the news that Fafnir and Indra had clashed. Britra stopped fighting Son Goku and started to move right away. Fortunately, Son Goku's somersault cloud was fast enough to follow the dragon's wings. Britra was annoyed by Son Goku's persistent pursuit, but she could not keep paying attention to Son Goku. Because right now, Indra, Fafnir, and the dragons would be fighting. Creak. Son Goku's lips went up. This situation was rather welcome for Son Goku. I told you, I'm not trying to fight you guys. Are you going to fight Indra? Yeah, no need. This is our dragon's business. Isn't it a bit too early to be discussing something like that? Sun Ogong's words made Britra shut his mouth. He wasn't wrong. The opponent was Indra, a dragon hunter, the natural enemy of dragons. Half of the dragons had perished by his hand. Fafnir had gathered an army to challenge Indra, and history was about to repeat itself. But perhaps the Overlord would be different. He was one of the top 10 strongest beings in this tower. Instead, Britra looked up at the voice that was suddenly coming from above his head. If we manage to catch Indra this time, don't hate humans so much. That's impossible, just think about it. Whatever his answer was, it didn't matter. Sun Ogong's entire body was trembling with excitement for the upcoming battle. I've said everything I needed to say. The reconciliation of dragons and humans. Sun Ogong had sought out Britra for that purpose. And just as Wu Yian had said, Sun Ogong extended his hand to Britra. That was all he had to do. He was now free to fight to his heart's content. The ground was soaked with blood. Standing in the middle of the battlefield, Indra, half naked and his body covered in blood, looked at the giant dragon in front of him. You're quite tenacious for a life form. Indra raised his hand. Crackle. Electricity gathered at his fingertips. Kwaat, kya. Fafnir screamed as a huge blue electric shock enveloped his body. Thud. Fafnir finally fell to his knees after the wave of electricity swept over his body. Dragons were beings that were naturally resistant to magic. And Fafnir had an exceptional physique, even among dragons. But none of that mattered in front of Indra. It wasn't just because he was the natural enemy of dragons. Why have you gotten stronger? Rank 6. It was a high enough rank. Fafnir knew about the rankings even though he wasn't a player and thus wasn't included in them. But despite that, Fafnir couldn't understand why this fight was so one-sided. I trained relentlessly. Bang. Indra clenched both fists. Unlike you who just let time pass you by. It had been thousands of years since the dragons had disappeared. During that time, Indra had tempered his body. Without rest. He had pounded his body, again and again, to gain his current strength. This was the result. Dragon hunting. Half of the dragons had perished by his hand. He intended to kill all the leaders of the dragons, including Popner and Britra, as well as the numerous remaining dragons. That was the power he had cultivated and nurtured. You're the beginning. Crackle, crackle. Indra's fists were filled with magic power. His fists were about to smash down on Popner's head, crushing his skull in one blow. Yeah, a loud roar could be heard from somewhere. Indra's head turned up, following the sound. Popner also sensed something strange. Soon, a large shadow fell over Indra's head. Indra. The voice drew closer, and then, Kwang. Indra's body was crushed by a giant pillar. Popner looked up at the pillar that had fallen in front of him, reaching up to the sky, while still lying on the ground. At the top of the pillar. I heard you're very strong. A man with snow-white hair and a playful expression stood there. Let's have a go. A dragon like Popner, the man who had appeared with Britra. The Overlord had come to fight Indra. Chapter 290. There was no response for a while. Standing on top of his Rui Jingu Bang, Sun Ogong waited for Indra's response with a curious expression. Is he dead already? He lowered his head and looked down below the Rui Jingu Bang. While Indra remained unresponsive, Fafnir looked at Britra. What the hell happened? It was true that he had asked Britra for help. However, Sun Ogong's presence, who had come along, was unexpected even for Fafnir. Britra answered his question. It's impossible to catch that guy with just the two of us. Indra, he was called the Dragon Slayer, the natural enemy of their race. Just like Heracles, the giant slayer, Indra, who was called the Dragon Slayer, gained an unreasonable advantage over the dragons. For example, the dragon's magic power did not reach his body. We need outside help, so you're saying that we have to get help from humans? Is there any other way? Even so, if the price of our pride is the fate of our race, I think it's too expensive. Fafnir, who had been baring his teeth at Sun Ogong, shut his mouth at Britra's words. It wasn't wrong. Pride. If their race had to perish to protect it, it was too expensive a price to pay. The problem was that they still didn't trust the human race. The years they had suffered from Indra were so long. That was when it happened. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The ground shook and the Rui Jingu Bang under Sun Ogong's feet shook. Sun Ogong's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, rumble. The Rui Jingu Bang rose slightly into the air. Indra, who had been lying underneath, raised his hand and lifted Sun Ogong along with the Rui Jingu Bang. The Rui Jingu Bang. Creak, creak. Blood vessels wrapped around his arms. Sun Ogong's eyes flashed at the flow of magic power he felt beneath his feet. No way. Booing. The Rui Jingu Bang flew up into the air. Indra, who had lifted the Rui Jingu Bang with his hand, threw it up into the sky. At the same time, Indra appeared above Sun Ogong's head. Crackle, crackle. His fist was filled with a huge electric shock. Zong. He thrust his fist down. Kwa thud. The end of the Rui Jingu Bang was as lightly dented. Sun Wukong's eyes rolled back into his head, and his body trembled from the electric shock. Boom, 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 boom. Indra's fists continuously banged on Sun Wukong's body. At the end, Indra seized Sun Wukong's neck and threw him down hard toward the ground. No, he tried to throw him. Gulp. The strength off hands gripping Indra's arm. Sun Wukong, who had been hanging from Indra's arm and not thrown, smiled. What the, you, flash. Indra's face was reflected above the summit of fire ring. You're really strong, huh? You won met Zeus. Zeus, who had finished preparing, was alone. What about Asura and Hargan? They left first. Hargan isn't really needed in this fight. True, Asura had moved first. He would probably be the first to arrive. The fight had started sooner than expected. That was probably because Ragnarok had occurred that much faster. We need to hurry, before Asura gets to him first. He briefly explained the situation on the other side to Zeus. Indra, who was fighting Fafnir. Sun Wukong, who had joined the battlefield with Britra. Even those three alone were an overwhelming force. No matter how much Indra was the natural enemy of dragons, Sun Wukong was also on their side. But if Asura joined them too, it's too easy. Yeah, too easy. Zeus agreed with Iowanza muttering, our forces are stronger. Even if it's just the four of them, it's certain once I join. They had the same thought. There was no doubt about Indra's strength. His rank proved it. But even so, their forces were far ahead of him. Tactics, strategy, we don't need anything like that. Even now, I don't want to think about it and just hurry. Are you anxious? I learned from fighting you. Destroying Olympus. Zeus had lost to Yuan in that fight. At that time, Yuan was much weaker than he was now. Something I thought would be easy turned out to be more difficult. Variables exist everywhere. Avik feeling and anxiety, but Zeus had lived a long time and K knew. Sometimes, this kind of unfounded anxiety could be more certain. If something happens, Yuan looked at the player kit in his hand. I'll get a message, definitely, as expected. Wah! Yuan muttered as the wind flew in front of him. As expected. Sun Wukong's clone flew in on a somersault cloud with the wind. The fact that he sent a clone without contacting him through the player kit meant that the situation was urgent enough that he couldn't leisurely send a text. He sent a clone right away. A clone that could fly on a somersault cloud was a pretty fast and quick means of communication. Yuan had asked him to definitely inform him if anything happened differently from the plan. It was none other than Sun Wukong. Yuan believed that he would convey the information in any situation. And this time, Sun Wukong didn't betray his trust. A clone, this is the first time I've seen it. Sun Wukong with the same face. Zeus, who saw him for the first time, had a curious expression. Sun Wukong, who got off the somersault cloud, glanced at Zeus and opened his mouth. I met Indra, I know, I thought that would happen by now. But that bastard is strong. Sun Wukong said he was strong. This wasn't very common. A guy with a strong ego wouldn't easily admit it unless his opponent was decent. How strong could he be? As he was thinking about it, the clone continued. I think that bastard broke through the ceiling. The ceiling? What now? Yuan wasn't the only one who was surprised. Zeus was the same. Zeus, who approached the clone, grabbed his shoulder. Did you just say that Indra broke through the ceiling? That's what he said. Swish, the clone's figure became faint. Soon, I've got to go. Poof. The clone, which had turned into a handful of magic power, disappeared on the spot. Yuan and Zeus, both of them stood there with the same expression. Sun Wukong's words hit the two of them like a heavy hammer. The ceiling of the tower. The world above the 100th floor, which was the qualification to become a ranker. It was the realm that Zeus had yearned for so much. And that was also the reason why Zeus wanted power so much. But Indra had broken through that ceiling. On the other hand, Yuan's shock was different from Zeus's. I need to change the plan. We need to change the plan. And in its form, Zeus's eyes gradually grew larger. This was the biggest variable among the assumed variables. At this point, the fact that Indra had broken through the ceiling was a fact that even Yuan did not know. It meant that he had become a being of a different dimension. If so, Sun Wukong, Fafnir, and even Britra, the three fighting on the battlefield over there would never be able to defeat Indra. We need to set our positions. Position meant each of their roles in the overall flow of the battle, close combat and long-range combat. When fighting with many people, it was a way to strengthen their power by perfectly fulfilling their roles or to defeat a stronger opponent. It was judged that Indra could not be defeated in a normal fight. In the case of high rankers, it is a method that is not often used because the individual's power is higher than that of dozens or hundreds of rankers. Especially in the case of high rankers like Zeus, who is the head of a guild and one of the top 10, they tend not to care about their position. However, I'll throw the spear. Fortunately, Zeus was not the type to be proud of such a thing. A lion does its best even when hunting a rabbit. It is far from the appearance of a king to not do his best when hunting a beast that is bigger and more ferocious than him. Since you have gigantification, block his attack. It will be difficult alone, but with Chiante Dizong and Asura, you should be able to withstand it. No, Yuan shook his head. I'll throw the spear. Zeus's eyebrows narrowed. Even when there is not much time. I didn't want to argue over something useless. Moreover, he also felt that Yuan and his thoughts were similar, so he did not think that his thoughts would go in this direction. Have you forgotten who I am? Pgg, I am Zeus. A golden thunderbolt gathered at his fingertips. Despite losing the lightning, it instantly took the form of a spear. It was even more surprising to see it up close. To be able to build up that much magic power in the form of a spear at such a fast speed even without the power of an item. The only one who can throw a better spear than me is Odin. A tone full of confidence that soared through the sky. He was qualified enough to do so. However, one more person was added a few days ago. This time, his thoughts were wrong. Chut. A single jet black spear appeared in Yuan's hand. And as its shape became clear, Zeus's eyes gradually grew bigger. I'll throw the spear. Boom! Sun Wukong's fist connected with Indra's jaw. His fist throbbed. Even his solid fist had difficulty penetrating Indra's body. Crackle, crackle, the blue lightning armor wrapped around Indra's body. That was the reason he couldn't penetrate it. A head-on confrontation. Indra's hand reached out. It probably won't end well for you. Bam! His hand shot out quickly. In an instant, it grabbed the nape of Sun Wukong's neck, and was about to slam him back into the ground. However, swish, Indra's hand passed through the empty air. It was a close call. Sun Wukong, who had dodged Indra's hand, was now holding the Ruyi Jingu Bang in his hand. Get bigger. The end of the staff was aimed at close range. Ruyi, bam, the extended Ruyi Jingu Bang sent Indra's body flying. Far away, the peak of the mountain shattered, and Indra soared high into the sky. Cold sweat dripped from his forehead. His vision blurred, but at the same time, his field of vision became clearer than ever. Sun Wukong turned his body. Is that the Waningen armor? Indra came into view. There was a wound on his chest. It was a wound caused by the impact of the Ruyi Jingu Bang just now. It's certainly tricky. It feels like I can catch it, but I can't. He muttered as if it was difficult, but Indra still had room to spare. The one who was shocked was rather Sun Wukong. Even though he had been hit by the Ruyi Jingu Bang at such a close range, he only suffered that degree of injury. He's even stronger than Heracles. Of course, the important thing was not his torso. Crackle, crackle, through the Waningen armor, he could see the flow of magic power surrounding Indra. The lightning armor surrounding Indra. Without piercing that armor, it was impossible to inflict damage on Indra. However, there is no weakness. The Ruyi Jingu Bang was not powerful enough to pierce through it. Since there were no gaps in the Waningen armor either, it could be considered to have no weaknesses. In that case, there was only one way. A single blow powerful enough to pierce the armor and deal damage. Chapter 291. The head rolled. A powerful blow that could pierce Indra's armor. What could it be? That was the problem. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't think of such a blow. I don't know. Sun Wukong, scratching his head as if it was going to explode, raised the Ruyi Jingu Bang again. Anyway, he had already passed on the information about Indra. That was the end of his roll. Poof, pop, pop, pop. Numerous Sun Wukongs appeared around Indra. Doppelganger technique. A skill that symbolizes Sun Wukong along with the fire eye's golden eyes. How spectacular. Even though he was standing in the middle of over 100 doppelgangers, Indra's momentum did not die down. Rather, crackle, he put his strength firmly on his two legs and straightened his back as if to say, come in if you want to. Get bigger, get bigger, get. Dozens of Ruyi Jingu Bangs were aimed at him. Ruyi, thud, Ruyi Jingu Bangs flew in from various directions and crushed Indra's body. No, it looked like they were crushed. Crackle, thud. The Ruyi Jingu Bangs were shattered. Even though they were fakes held by the doppelgangers, they were not objects that could be broken so easily. Thud, thud, thud. He smashed the Ruyi Jingu Bangs with his fists and broke the doppelgangers one by one. Just as Indra reached Sun Wukong. What, did you come first? Indra found Sun Wukong muttering behind the disappeared doppelganger. And behind him, roar, with the twilight of red magic, 6 arms and 6 swords appeared. Asura's demonic sword. The 6 swords slashed at one point simultaneously. Indra, who was running towards Sun Wukong, froze his body on the floor and crossed his arms to protect his body. The next moment, screech, Asura's sword cut through Indra's chest. Thud, rumble, rumble. His body flew backwards. He couldn't hold on. Indra, who had crashed into the rock mountain and was buried in its wreckage, touched the wound on his chest. Blood was seeping out. Twice already, he had been wounded twice. It meant that there was an attack that had pierced through his armor, however slightly. Whether it was carelessness or not, it was his mistake. Rumble, rumble. Indra got up, carrying the wreckage of the rocks that were covering his body, and looked at the ranker who had appeared in the distance. 3 heads, 6 arms. He was being held by Sun Wukong, but he looked like he was about to rush towards him at any moment. A hard-to-forget appearance. Not only that, but he was also quite a famous high ranker in this tower. Asura, a 3-headed, 6-armed monster. He was the one who created this guy. Thud, thud, brushing off the dust on his body. What a disgusting guy. Indra looked at Fafnir, who was recovering and half risen. Thud, thud, it was a fight to catch Fafnir. However, with Asura also appearing in the Heavenly Saint, he felt like things were getting a little bigger. It didn't matter much. Even though he was wounded, it was only enough to be called a scratch. I don't know why the Heavenly Saint is here, but 2 dragons, and even Asura. Looking at the enemies that appeared before him, Indra had a strange feeling. An itchy and stuffy feeling. This kind of feeling was usually not wrong. Is this my turning point? Britra and Fafnir. Once he killed the 2 dragons, his purpose would be practically finished. A race that lost its leader was bound to collapse. Once that happened, all that was left was to tear apart the dragons that had lost their leader. The end is in sight. Crackle. Indra looked at Sun Wukong and Asura, who appeared before him. He had no intention of backing down. Let go. Roar. The Asuras immediately understood what that action meant. Asura's arm was filled with strength. Sun Wukong, who was holding his arm. He scratched his head with his other hand and asked. Are you trying to kill yourself? You don't understand words. Killing intent appeared in the eyes of his first head. Soon after, the swords held in his 2 hands began to move. As the situation became urgent, Sun Wukong hurriedly dodged the sword and looked for another head. Hey, third one, the third Asura, he was the only one who could communicate. Are you really going to fight me? Then you won't have the strength to fight that guy. Quote. There was no answer from Asura for a moment. But soon, snap, 2 other hands grabbed the hand that was swinging the sword at Sun Wukong. What are you doing? Don't do anything stupid. The second head was silent, and the third head stopped the first head. It's impossible to fight both Indra and the Heavenly King at the same time. Yeah, as expected, the third head was a bit more communicative. Sun Wukong, who had approached in the meantime, patted Asura on the shoulder and said. Let's fight together, us. Together. Asura looked at Sun Wukong with suspicious eyes. He had an expression that asked, why you? That's impossible, that guy is mine. The first head said, didn't I already talk to those guys? To not insist on catching that guy alone. Sun Wukong shrugged at the second head's words. I don't like it either. But you know. Boom, a pillar of lightning rising from the sky. Can you catch that guy alone? Quote. It was cold. Asura frowned at the magical power he felt from afar. I can't win. The second head, who had been silent until now, opened his mouth. Are you going to run away again? No, then. The second and third Asuras looked in the same direction. Of course, the first Asura's face was crumpled. Are you really going to fight together? It was a murderous reaction, as if it was ridiculous. But that was only for a moment. Rumble. His body also trembled at the dark clouds that began to spread in the sky. Run away, or fight to the death. Or just grab a rag. The second head continued on what the third head said. A rag. It was what they said in a fight with the Heavenly King and 2 Dragon Kings. But no one could deny those words in this situation. Because Indra in front of them had that much power. That guy is a monster of a different dimension. If you want revenge, this is the only way. Okay, he didn't know about the upper world of the tower, but Asura also felt that he was a being 1 level higher than them. That's why even the first head, who had a strong self-esteem, had no choice but to fold his hard self-esteem. Instead, that guy's neck is mine. It was a firm voice, as if he couldn't give up on this. Of course, Sun Wukong wasn't going to be obsessed with such a thing. Whatever. Crackle, inside the high pillar of lightning. Indra came out, his chest wound healed. If we can win for now. Sun Wukong's forehead was covered in sweat due to the tension. It had been a long time. A fight where he wasn't sure he could win. It seemed like it was the first time since the fight with Outer. Surt was also a difficult opponent for the current Sun Wukong, but at that time, he had the strongest ally, Odin. But now, there was no ally that strong. Indra's power had suddenly surpassed the top 5 rankings and threatened Surt's ranking. And that's why, creak, Sun Wukong could smile more happily than anyone else at this moment. Asura, why, I'm sorry about the sect. The Asuras, heads all turned to Sun Wukong. The sect incident, all the Asuras immediately understood what that action meant. You, how? That was when he was about to ask how he knew. Bam, Sun Wukong's body flew away. Swish, crack. Sun Wukong and Indra collided. Sun Wukong, who was pushed back a little, soon began to swing his staff with one hand. Buzz, clang, the staff swung in 3 directions. The staff that stabbed Indra's body flowed past without any significant impact. Nevertheless, Sun Wukong continued to swing his staff without rest. What the heck is that? It's a familiar move. Don't you know? Flick, the staff moved smoothly but powerfully with each swing. That's the staff technique we use. Furthermore, it was so well developed that it was clearly visible from a distance. And on top of that, he even mentioned their school. Was this really a coincidence? No, I don't know about anything else, but that staff technique could never be a coincidence or a fluke. You can pick up information anywhere, but you can't use a discipline without learning it. What are you spacing out for? Asura's two arms moved first. Are you not going to fight? Click. His hands, which were holding the sword, tightened. Asura, who had been watching Sun Ogong fighting Indra, moved all 6 of his arms. That's obvious. His arms moved smoothly. At the same time. Wang. Asura stepped on the accelerator. Buzz. Crack. Indra's head turned. A sword that seemed to have flown from nowhere struck his head. His body staggered for a moment from the shock, and then his eyes turned to Asura. Indra's fist stretched forward. Crackle. Boom. Along with the fist, a huge electric shock was emitted forward. Asura and Sun Ogong. As if they had made a promise, the two of them split up and moved to the left and right. Both of them are definitely good with their hands and movements. Roar. The sword and staff extended at the same time. Clack, clack, clack. Indra crossed his arms and blocked the staff and sword. The faces of Sun Ogong and Asura were reflected in Indra's 2 eyes. They're good enough to make me want to learn. It wasn't just a matter of strength. Sun Ogong may seem simple and ignorant at first glance, but his staff was not stiff, and it was so flexible that it felt like it was bending. Asura knew how to use all 6 of his weapons, each in a different way. Furthermore, each one of them was a weapon technique that was as complete as Sun Ogong's. It was truly technically perfect. However, clang, clang. No matter how perfect the technique, it was meaningless in the face of overwhelming power. Thud. Indra walked into the 2 men's weapons with his bare body. Sun Ogong was the first to react. Get lost. Too late. His fist stretched out towards Sun Ogong, who was trying to push Indra away with his Rui Bang. Boom. A thunderclap sounded from the ground. There was a bright flash of light, and Sun Ogong's body flew away so far that he could not be seen. Asura instinctively distanced himself. No, he tried to. But then, don't be scared, his third head began to move as the main axis of his body. If you've made up your mind to fight, you shouldn't back down. As Indra's momentum grew stronger, Asura also drew his magic power. Rumble. Asura stepped forward as if he would not back down. Indra watched Asura, who was entering the wave of electricity on his own, with interest. You're a spirited one, and in the meantime, while his attention was briefly drawn to the 2 of them. Flutter. The 2 dragons, who had recovered their bodies, spread their wings wide and flew back into the sky. But my goal is still. Indra looked at the dragons with his white teeth bared. Those guys. Chapter 292. There was a human. He was raised by dragons and thought he was a dragon himself. As time passed, he realized that unlike him, who kept growing, the other dragons didn't change at all. That was when he realized that he was not a dragon, and he set out to find the reason why he was among the dragons. The Dragon King's War, a war of the dragons for their king to claim the throne. In one world, the dragons of the West and the East fought, and many humans were swept away and died because of it. He realized it. He was one of those who died, but survived. That was when time passed and he was chosen, the day he climbed the tower and became a ranker. Why are you doing this? He killed the dragons who raised him and smeared their blood all over his body. At first, it started with revenge. He retrieved the memories that the dragons had erased, and he remembered his lost family and the numerous people of the Indra tribe. A funeral to comfort their souls. It seemed like that was the purpose when he started. Now, I want greater power. He called himself Indra. It was the name of the god they worshipped, a martial god with the mysterious power to bring down thunder and rain. To use the name of a god. Indra vowed to become a god when he started using that name. Kwang. He decapitated a dragon, and then another. This is not revenge. He ripped out their hearts and blood, and smeared the blood on him without rest. You have acquired the title, Dragon Slayer. Along with the title, Indra was able to obtain their power. It's hunting. Indra, who declared war on dragons, vowed. He would kill all the dragons and take their power. And finally, their king, Britra and Fafnir. He would bite out their hearts. Flap. Britra spread his wings. Thud. Fafnir stood up and glared. Britra pushed Fafnir aside and bared his teeth. Get out of the way, Fafnir. I have just lost my kin to that bastard. You have only just recovered enough to move. Creak. Britra turned his head, in the direction where Indra, Sun Ogong, and Asura were fighting. I'll do it from here. Flap. Britra spread his wings and flew high into the sky. Fafnir also followed him into the sky, and they looked down on Indra. Hot heat gathered inside Britra's mouth. Breath. The strongest technique of the dragons, a single shot with greater killing power than any magic or skill. That single shot poured down on Indra. Rumble. The world turned red as a giant flame covered the ground. Asura quickly stepped on Shukuchi, and Sun Ogong flew into the sky using somersault cloud. Lightning surged from Indra's body. Indra planted his legs firmly on the ground and gripped a weapon in each of his hands. 2 Vajras. Indra wrapped each of them in electricity and stood there without dodging the breath. Are you going to face the breath head on? The ground burned. In an instant, the breath swallowed up the ground along with Indra. And in the meantime, crackle, a blue electric current shot through the flames, and a sharp Vajra flew towards Britra. Clang, the Vajra and Ruyi Bang collided. Sun Wukong, who had been watching Britra's flames from above Britra's head, had been watching the whole time. Indra facing the breath head on must mean that he's that confident. I knew you'd do that. Clatter, thud, he swung the Ruyi Bang and pushed Indra away, and the next moment, Asura stabbed him with 6 swords from the other side. But Indra had 2 Vajras. He knocked away Asura's swords with his other hand and turned his body to dig into his arms. Bam! Quote exclamation mark quote. The distance closed in an instant. Buzz. Indra's fist hit Asura in the face. Boom! Asura's head turned with the explosion. He tried to blow his body away, but he didn't. Swish! Indra's eyes flashed. Asura, who had grabbed his arm, stubbornly clung on. His arms were not 2, and his other arm was already aiming at him. Stubborn, maybe I'm not too bad at that. Sun Wukong and Asura held onto Indra without letting go. No matter how strong Indra was, it was not easy to shake them off. In the meantime, clang, Indra's fist was blocked in the air. A solid wall. Buzz. But the Ruyi Bang passed through the wall too easily. Clang. Thanks to that, Indra, who had been hit in the jaw, glanced at Britra and Fafnir, who were preparing a bigger breath than before in the distance. Were you getting into position? The guys who had been fighting haphazardly at first, each doing their own thing, were now finding their roles and moving. Perhaps it wasn't something that had been agreed upon. Perhaps they had instinctively realized what they had to do after starting the fight. At least the 2 in front of him were skilled enough to do so. But you know what? Crackle, boom, Indra received the weapons of the 2 men with his electrified arms. Drip, blood flowed from the arm that had been cut by the sword. He had a small bruise from being hit by the staff, but that was all. The price he paid for taking it with his body was great. Boom, crack, he swung the Vajra in his other hand and struck Asura in the abdomen. He gives flesh and takes bone. No, even this wasn't enough to be called flesh. It doesn't matter how much you do that. Crackle, crackle. An armor of electricity wrapped around his body. Unable to pierce through this armor, I cannot properly land a blow. I've pierced the heavens. Become larger. The Ruyi Jingu Bang approached his eyes. Swish. Indra grabbed it with his bare hands. That's why I'm on a whole other level than you. Electrostatic attribute magic. Creepy. A creepy feeling was felt right behind his back. The fight began, and for the first time, he felt danger. Indra let go of the Ruyi Jingu Bang he was holding and instinctively lowered his body. I can shake it with the same attribute magic. Ruyi. Thud. A giant Ruyi Jingu Bang stretched out above his head. Normally, he wouldn't be afraid of being swept away by it, but not this time. Pazuzu. The electrostatic armor wrapped around his body. The moment the Ruyi Jingu Bang stretched out, the magic power that made up the armor was disrupted. Was there one more? Sorry I'm late. Paget, Pajiji. Not too far away, a man with golden hair pointed one hand at himself. His face was so handsome and striking that it was unforgettable if you saw it even once. Zeus. Zeus, the former king of Olympus. He was also one of the few high rankers that Indra recognized. The moment Indra saw Zeus's face, he could tell what he wanted. You're after my heart, aren't you? Correct. Unlike Son Goku, whose purpose was unclear, Zeus's purpose was all too transparent. 2 high rankers who wielded the same attribute magic power. Indra had eaten the heart and blood of a dragon and became strong as he was now because of the karma. Because of that, it was known that if one obtained his heart, they would obtain the vast magic power of the dragons. Click, click, Son Goku and Asura, the 2 stood in front and behind Indra. From afar, Zeus disrupted the magic power, and the dragons protected the 2 with magic and breath. A fairly plausible position was created. Each and every one of them was a top-class high ranker in this tower. What day is it? You don't exactly look like comrades. You could tell just by looking at how Son Goku and Asura had met for the first time and had a brief quarrel. Moreover, judging from the fact that they didn't get along well in the beginning and played separately, they probably weren't planned members. That's right, we're not comrades yet. Chuck, Son Goku, who looked the most ragged. Such Son Goku aimed his staff at Indra again. Not yet. Not yet, it meant that they would someday. If that happened, it seemed like a really great team would be created. Because in this place right now were Asura, Son Goku, Zeus, and even the leaders of the dragons, who transcended race. We'll be comrades someday, even I find it hard to believe right now. Whoosh, Son Goku's fire-eye golden pupils burned red. It's definitely been decided. It was only for a moment, but Indra felt an overwhelming aura from it. Son Goku, the high ranker, Indra, who was called the great saint of heaven, fought against the heavenly realm and eventually won. When I heard it as a rumor, I thought it was amazing, but when I met him in person, he was even greater than the rumors. I buy your enthusiasm, but I don't know why he came to fight me. Bang, but you're wrong this time. Indra boosted his momentum by hitting his two fists together. If they really gathered here to catch me, if you wanted to catch me, you should have prepared much more meticulously. You should have spent decades or centuries refining your plan, synchronizing your breathing, and attacking. Kukung, kukukung, electricity spewed out of his fists. Unless you're a perfect team. The magic power that could shake the heavens and earth gathered in his hand. As if he had been waiting for it, Zeus moved his golden lightning to match it. Your weakness will eventually be revealed. Flash. Quarring. In an instant, the blue lightning devoured the golden lightning. Indra dashed forward and stretched out his fist towards where Zeus had been. Zeus was swept away by the wave of lightning. Asura, who had thought they would have a head-on confrontation, paused for a moment. Since he didn't know that Zeus had joined, it took him a little longer to grasp the situation. Pipyoruk, on the other hand, Sun Wukong immediately grew his Rui Jingu Bang and swung it towards Indra. A brief gap. Sun Wukong shouted so as not to allow that gap. What are you doing? Stick to him. Asura moved at Sun Wukong's cry. As the two of them stuck to him again, Indra couldn't just ignore them. Their swords and cudgels had enough power to be quite bothersome to ignore. I took care of the most annoying guy first. Zeus. A high ranker who was skilled enough to manipulate magic power to the point of cutting through his own lightning. He was the most annoying one among them. That's why Indra moved to take care of Zeus first, even if he had to force his way through. Fortunately, though, Zeus made a big mistake. An idiot who could throw spears from a distance came close. If he had created lightning from further away and thrown it, the fight would have probably become much more annoying and complicated. Fortunately, though, Zeus came into his domain. And the result was PGG. It was then. It's humiliating, no matter how I think about it. A golden lightning appeared behind Indra. Indra quickly turned his head towards the light. Did I not hit him? PGG. Two lightnings of different colors and similar nature collided. The gap created like that. Me, acting as someone else's lackey. With those words, Shuak, Chak, Shuchak, Sun Wukong, Asura, and Zeus disappeared without a trace. And through that gap, flash, a black spear dug itself in deeply. Chapter 293. Out of the blue, each of them had a role to play. Like Son Goku and Asura, Britra and Fafnir were also aware of their roles. Indra's objective was them. In the beginning, he used to hunt dragons for revenge, but at some point, he began hunting dragons to gain greater power. After obtaining the title of Dragon Hunter, his goal became clearer and more distinct. Dragon Hunter. The effect of that title was to take power from the hearts of the dragons he killed. A sudden plunge into the heavenly great saint. I can't believe this happened so suddenly. A team was being formed abruptly. Of course, they weren't close enough to be called comrades. Not only that, those two were not just part of a team, they were more than capable of leading a large guild. Britra and Fafnir thought that perhaps the outcome of this fight could bring about a big change in the tower. For now, we have to think of them as a team. Who would have thought we'd be fighting with a team like players? Unlike players or rankers, Britra and Fafnir were beings outside the rankings who had lived for an eternity and gained strength on their own. Naturally, it was their first time fighting in a team like players. However, they were dragons. Innate archmages who only grew more proficient in magic as time went on. Furthermore, the dragon race was known for possessing outstanding intelligence. I'll shoot the breath. Warroar. Britra looked at Fafnir while gathering his breath in his mouth. You protect them. Long-range attacks and support. Those two things were their roles. Breath consumed a lot of magic power. Britra was in a better position than Fafnir, who was relatively more exhausted and injured. I guess I have no choice. Fafnir also put aside his pride for the time being and complied with him. For now, catching Indra was the top priority. Roar. Just like that, the moment Britra was about to shoot his breath. Wait a little longer. Britra slightly closed his mouth at the voice he heard above his head. And at the same time, Quirang, Zeus appeared behind Indra and clashed with him. Fafnir turned his head and looked at the human who had come above Britra's head. What are you? I'm their comrade. One pointed at the three people who were fighting Indra. Right now, it would be much more believable to answer like this than to explain himself in detail. Are you saying you're the one who brought Zeus here? Fortunately, Britra and Fafnir recognized Zeus. Of course. His face was one that no one who had seen it even once would be able to forget. Moreover, it would be impossible not to recognize him when he was emitting such dazzling lightning bolts. Not just Zeus, but all of them. So you were the one who tried to persuade me through the heavenly great saint. Britra remembered what Son Goku had said when he came to him. He seemed to have been trying to convey someone's words. It seemed that the someone was Yuan, who was now above his head. Did you create this game board? If so, it was a remarkable ability, regardless of his strength. To be able to gather these high-ranking rankers and make them fight together. We don't have time to chat leisurely. Chut. Ominous magic power gathered in Yuan's hand. The dark attribute magic power gathered together to form the shape of a spear, and soon it took on a form. That's. Fafnir's voice quivered after confirming the shape of the spear. A long spear stretched out long and thin. Yuan, who showed them the familiar shape of the spear, started to move. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say. Pooh ha ha, quote. Indra's eyes widened. A spear pierced through his chest. Then, Sun Ogong, Asura, Zeus suddenly disappeared. It took a moment to grasp the situation. Indra found someone else who threw the spear. Where did it come from? Clang, the eerie feeling started from that moment. Zeus's electric armor became vulnerable for a moment because of his clash with Zeus's electricity. The spear that penetrated through the gap pierced through his body perfectly. Quagwagwagwa, the huge spear engulfed Indra's body. The sound disappeared and the darkness devoured Indra's electricity. The elongated spear created a long, thin, black line that stretched up to the sky. Cuckoo. The colors of the world disappeared for a moment. Asura and Sun Ogong looked at each other in black and white, bewildered. What the hell happened? I don't know, me neither. Sun Ogong didn't know what was going on either. He thought that Wu Yian would do something, but he never thought it would be like this. The long spear that cut through the sky looked like Gingnir. The only difference was that unlike Gingnir's spear that rose into the sky, the spear that unfolded before his eyes stretched out like a line. How far did Indra fly? Sun Ogong and Asura's gazes turned to Zeus, who had appeared with them. Do you know something? Wu Yian decided to bring Zeus to their side. The fact that he came here must have been a part of Wu Yian's plan. Even though he is half-half. However, even with Sun Ogong's question, Zeus just looked at the scene unfolding before his eyes without saying anything. It wasn't groundless. I'm the one who threw the spear. When he first heard those words, he thought Wu Yian was crazy. How dare he say that he would throw the spear first when he was right next to him? But soon, looking at the Gingnir-like spear in Wu Yian's hand, he decided to trust him once. That's how he ended up riding on the cloud that he controlled with Wu Yian. Wu Yian set his stance for battle. The problem is the timing of throwing the spear. Sun Ogong and Asura were here. The two of them were fighting at a relatively close distance. Naturally, if he threw the spear, they would get caught up in it. However, if he separated the two of them from Indra, there would be no timing to hit Indra with the spear. That's why Wu Yian came up with one method. I'll need the Dragon Clan's magic. You mean teleport? Yes, the Dragon Clan was the race most proficient in magic in this tower. Moreover, Britra and Fafnir here were the leaders of such Dragon Clans, beings who were on the same level as the top high rankers. It was the perfect condition to use teleport, which could move long distances in an instant. The positions of Asura, Sun Ogong, Wu Yian, and the Dragon Clan were set. In that position, Zeus found his role. I will block Indra's power. Is that possible? Indra will target me first. If I confirm that and set a trap, it's not impossible. Sun Ogong and Asura restrict Indra's movement, and Zeus breaks his armor. In the meantime, Wu Yian throws the spear and the Dragon Clan rescues the three with teleport. That was the plan that Zeus and Wu Yian had drawn up. The key was how powerful the spear Wu Yian threw was. And now, Zeus was confirming the result with his own eyes. I shouldn't turn him into an enemy if possible. There was one more being who had the same thought. The king of Asgard, Odin. His spear was more powerful than any skill Zeus had ever seen. Compared to that, the spear that unfolded before his eyes felt similar, though it was a bit lacking. Compared to that, the window latticework spread out before my eyes gave off a similar feeling, although it was a bit lacking. On the other hand, unlike Odin, who was one of the oldest high rankers, Yuan had lived the shortest amount of time out of all the current rankers. If a little more time passes, I'll become much more of a monster. Plus, right before his eyes was the one who had been to the world above the ceiling, the paradise he had so desperately desired. It felt like his goal was getting closer. He had come to a point where he was just one step away from reaching it. Is it over? A somewhat desolate voice. It was Asura's mutter, who was standing to one side. If you were to look at the sight before your eyes, it was understandable that you would think that way. However, gulp, snap, Zeus flicked his finger and hit Asura in the back of the head. Asura, who had been hit in the head with a bolt of electricity, turned around with a fierce expression and looked at Zeus. You're relaxing too quickly. What are you doing? Do you not know about Indra? Asura's tension, which had loosened for a moment because of Zeus' scolding, returned. Then, Sun Wukong, who had been tightening his grip on the Rui Jingu Bang next to him, spoke up. That guy is immortal. Immortal. It was the power that had brought Sun Wukong to this place and the power that had made him known as the Great Sage, equal to heaven. That's what they say. At those words, Zeus looked at Sun Wukong as if he was surprised. It was as if he had thought he was an airhead, but he wasn't. Sun Wukong looked at the direction where Indra had flown after being hit by the spear. He couldn't see it very well, even with the fire-eyed gold-seeing technique. Actually, he's not immortal at all. And then, Sun Wukong turned to Asura and asked. Right, Asura. A black line appeared in the sky. Indra's body did not have that much defense to survive a direct hit like that. The real tough thing was the armor surrounding him, not his body. The problem starts there, when there were a lot of rumors about Indra's immortality. Asura told the story of his experience. Indra gets stronger the more times he loses his life. Even if he doesn't have infinite lives like that monkey, he has a finite number of lives, but he has a few more than others. He got stronger there. The fact that his life was finite was good news, but the fact that he got stronger as he died was another problem. Considering Indra's rank, getting stronger there was a separate issue. Then there's no way for quite a while. According to the information, he's a bigger monster than we thought. We might have to plan to just leave him out of it. Even Odin, who knew relatively well about Indra, could not find a way to deal with him. He comes back to life even if he dies, and he gets stronger each time. How can you catch a guy with such a fraudulent ability? When everyone was astonished by the information about Indra. No matter how it happened, he eventually cut off that guy's neck. Yuan focused on the fact that Asura had eventually defeated Indra. Coming from you, it doesn't seem like you're going to give up. Asura was a battle-crazed demon. He was also a guy who was just as, if not more, enthusiastic than Sun Wukong. There was no way that he would give up hunting Indra, his mortal enemy, from his mouth. As expected, yeah, from the beginning, Asura had brought up the story with the answer to it. And that answer was the biggest reason Yuan had sought out Asura in this fight. Zeus, Sun Wukong, the Dragon King, the reason why Asura was more important than any of them in this fight. If it's the answer to immortality, I have it. He had the most important clue that could stop Indra's immortality. Chapter 294. Is that so, Asura? To Son Goku's question, Asura nodded his head. Once I kill him, that's it. Quote. Zeus looked at Asura with a puzzled expression. No matter how ignorant he was, he couldn't have not understood his words. Moreover, he had been tracking Indra longer than anyone else and had gathered information about him. Of course, he wouldn't be ignorant about Indra. Asura must have also known that Indra didn't die easily. That guy and I learned under the same master. Swoosh. Asura looked at the palm of his hand. Blood seeped out onto his hand. The things we learned and mastered were similar. Do you know about the clue to immortality as well? Zeus didn't know much about Asura. He only knew that he sought out strong opponents to fight, desired greater power, and was an enemy of Indra. Even he, who had been the king of Olympus, didn't know where he was born or who he was close to. Our school was a small one with only 13 people. Asura's head opened its mouth. That was the beginning. Indra was my sworn brother. He was our sworn brother. Swoosh. Wiping the blood on his hand on his forehead, Asura continued speaking. The power we mastered and inherited is special. We devour each other, seize that power, and take their lives. Asura's gaze turned to Son Goku. That's why Indra's life is finite, unlike that guy's. Then by any chance, except for the three of us. Asura's eyes turned red. That guy took everything from us. That's why he has 10 lives. 10 lives. He had taken those from people he had eaten and lived with. It was something that could only be done if one learned and mastered the same thing. That was how Indra gained 10 lives and, after experiencing several deaths, came to be called an immortal existence in this tower. However, we chose a different path. Asura's choice was different from Indra's. Instead of having 1 life, we gained the power of 3 people. Thanks to that, I became like this. A monster with 3 heads and 6 arms. He didn't like that title. Having 3 people living in one body was a terrible thing for anyone. This is enough. Chi. Asura sent his magic power through the blood on his forehead. The blood rose into the sky, creating a red mist, and soon it gathered together to form a shape. That guy will end here. Thud. Indra, who had collapsed to the ground, raised his head. The pieces of rock that had fallen from above had hit his head. Indra, who had briefly lost consciousness, looked down at his chest. What a sight! A gaping hole in his chest. His heart and intestines had completely flown out. No matter how tenacious his vitality, he should have died from a wound of this size. But once, there was still a chance. Gulp, gulp. His lost heart returned. His vision, which had been hazy for a moment, returned, and his body began to regain some vitality. And around that time, rumble, crunch, someone walked through the pile of rocks and towards Indra. Indra made a puzzled expression as he confirmed Yuan's face. It wasn't the ones who had been fighting him just now. He felt strange as a face he had never seen before approached him. It wasn't that he had just happened to pass by. Although it was a face he had never seen before, he felt like the other person definitely knew him. Who are you? Yuan didn't answer. Instead, Indra was able to confirm Yuan's identity through the long spear in his hand. It was the spear that had taken one of his precious lives. You were the one who threw this. A guy whose name and face he didn't know. The energy he felt was not that great. He seemed to be a high ranker with considerable skill, but he felt lacking compared to the existences he had fought until now, such as Asura, Son Goku, and Zeus. Just wait a little. Once I recover my body, you have no chance left. What? As soon as those words ended, thump, the beating of the regenerating heart slowed down. In an instant, his chest felt heavy as if his heart had stopped, and blood rushed up from his throat. What the hell did you do? I didn't do anything. Fortunately, it was as expected. Asura did it. The reason why Asura was able to defeat Indra. He had spent a long time searching for a way to burn Indra's remaining life. I only need to kill him once. Just once. And the blood of Indra that he had obtained through battle. That was the condition to burn Indra's remaining life. The life that Indra has taken has the same root as the absorption grand technique. The problem is that you can only take the power of an opponent who has learned the same martial art, so the original purpose was for a master to give their power to their disciple when they retire. There was such a martial art. I've heard of the absorption grand technique. It's a martial art that is taboo in the martial arts world, but I've never heard of such a restriction. If there was something like that, you would become infinitely stronger with each generation. I'm just finding out now. The absorption grand technique is a martial art that only a handful of players in the martial arts world have mastered. However, Asura's roots were similar yet different. What he learned was not simply to take away magic power. Then, the opponent's life, and even their blood and soul. Asura knew the root of the martial art that Indra had learned. That's why he has several lives, and that's why I was able to kill him. Yuan looked at Indra's wound. The wound did not heal. Rather, it grew larger and larger, while Indra's lifeline grew thinner. If possible, I didn't want it to turn out like this. Cough. Indra coughed up blood. Yuan continued speaking with a heavy heart. No matter how many lives you have left, I thought I could just kill them all. Even if he had nirvana, his opponent was Indra. The same method as before would not work. Even if he activated the spear again, it would probably be difficult to hit him. That's why Asura had no choice but to make the same choice again. What I need to take his life is another life. Asura's first head. He was unusually talkative compared to the second and third heads. He was the most active, and he was the one who usually took over the body and moved it. All 3 of Asura's heads had lost their lives in different places. The first to die among them was the first head of the 3 heads. He lost his life in a fight with Indra. Before I go, let me ask you one thing. The light in Indra's eyes gradually faded away. While there was still a lifeline left. Yu Wen had an answer he wanted to hear from him. Do you know about the foolish chaos? Indra, who had been hanging his head down, raised his head for a moment. It was only for a moment, but that reaction alone was enough to hear the answer. Yes, it was a fact that no one had confirmed. It didn't make much difference whether he knew or not, but he still wanted to confirm it. Were you also a pawn prepared by him? Indra, why he grew up in the arms of the Dragon Clan. Why the Dragon Clan raised a human they had destroyed. And how Indra came to harbor a grudge against the Dragon Clan and kill them. He thought he understood a little. And then, as promised. Crash, the hand that had been waiting for the right moment sprang out from behind Indra. I'll take this. Did he rush over after hearing Asura's explanation? Zeus clutched Indra's dying heart in his hand. Unlike a normal heart, it looked like a round, blue jewel. Crack, crackle, the electricity that was flowing out of Indra uncontrollably as he died gradually stopped. It seemed that Zeus, who was holding it, was now controlling the power instead of Indra. If you take Indra's heart, you can obtain his power. It seemed that this wasn't just a simple rumor. Has it become a kind of inner core? A form that is seen in old spirits. Most of the power that Indra had taken in the first place wasn't originally his, but rather the power of members of his school or the dragons. Zeus will probably be able to regain his old power through that. No, maybe he'll be able to obtain even greater power than he had in the past, when he reigned as the king of Olympus. Twitch, that was when Indra's body, which had been dying, moved. Open hollow corner bracket, it's you again. Close hollow corner bracket. The voice was the same. However, both Wu Yun and Zeus could tell right away that the owner of the voice wasn't Indra. Open hollow corner bracket Kim Wu Yun. Close hollow corner bracket. Is it the foolish chaos? He was aware of himself. Of course, there was no way he couldn't be. After all, Wu Yun had foiled so many of his plans up until now. Even so, Wu Yun wasn't too worried about the foolish chaos. He would only move from behind the scenes, and it would take much longer than now for him to come to the forefront. But the fact that he's shown his face when it wasn't in the plan. Wu Yun looked at the foolish chaos through Indra's eyes, which had turned purple. It must mean that he's desperate. He probably didn't show up for no reason. He was a being with the serpent's tongue that would lead this tower into chaos. What on earth did he come to say and how? The one who was relatively impatient compared to Wu Yun was Zeus. Just wait a little longer. Crackle, crackle, he glared at the foolish chaos, tightly clutching Indra's heart in his hand. I'll come looking for you soon. Zeus had two goals. To break through the ceiling of the tower and climb higher, and to catch the foolish chaos who had used him to shake Olympus. And now that he had obtained Indra's heart as he had planned, he was one step closer to those two goals. Open hollow corner bracket, it's been a long time, great king of Olympus. Close hollow corner bracket. The foolish chaos, who had possessed Indra's body, turned his head. Open hollow corner bracket, you have lost much, but I sincerely congratulate you on obtaining something even greater. Close hollow corner bracket. How much of that was sincere and how much was false? There was power in the words that the foolish chaos uttered. It wasn't that the high rankers were fools and were deceived by his words. The rankers who faced the foolish chaos all said the same thing. If you exchange 3 words with the foolish chaos, you will come to believe him, and if you exchange 3 more words, you will come to think of him as a friend. That was why Wu Yun had no intention of talking to him in the first place. Open hollow corner bracket, however, I have other things to do right now. Close hollow corner bracket. Screech. A red line of blood ran across Indra's body. Naturally, the voice of the foolish chaos, who was speaking through his body, also stopped. No matter who he was, he couldn't convey his thoughts without a medium through which to speak. You may have something to do with me. Crash. Indra's severed body split in two and fell to the sides. I have no such thing. Chapter 295. Crack. The first head twisted and wilted. At some point, he knew that it had stopped making a sound and lost its vitality. However, the second and third heads did not show it. They had already held each other's funeral long ago. It was the same for him to sacrifice himself for this day that would surely come. It was a promised event, so they had promised not to grieve or be heartbroken now because they had already grieved enough. Farewell. It was bland for a farewell to a twin who had lived in one body all their life. However, the calm aftermath lingered for a long time. Gulp. He sensed a presence nearby. He had felt it before, but he turned his head belatedly. Asura found Wu Yun, and then, I'm sorry. Wu Yun bowed his head. What, if I had prepared a little more? He could not finish speaking. There was a deep regret in his unfinished words. What was he trying to say? It's not something you should be sorry for. If that regret was for the sacrifice of the first head. This was promised a long time ago. Really, a very long time ago. He could not remember how long the promise had been. Rather, Asura scratched his head and opened his mouth to Wu Wan, who was in front of him. That's why it has nothing to do with you. Rather. He slurred his words for a long time. Thank you. The third head finished it. No matter what their purpose was, the fact that Wu Wan had helped them with their revenge would not change. Of course, sometimes I think of the first one. Wu Wan was not just apologizing to Asura, who was here. When the hourglass was first mentioned and when they were discussing who would go back. Asura had rarely insisted that he would go back. If I go back, I'll be able to see him. And everyone promised to Asura's words. No matter who went back. They would not let Asura be sacrificed in the fight against Indra. The first failure, he thought that he could not achieve everything. He was prepared for the fact that there would be times when he would fail or stagnate for a long time somewhere. It was something that could happen once in a while, since he had planned and acted on so many things. It was just happening now. And that was why Wu Wan felt sorry for Asura. When this is over, Wu Wan looked at Asura's remaining heads. They had also lost their lives in the fight against Outer. And Wu Wan could not stop it from happening. However, then, I hope you won't die again. At least this time. He hoped the outcome would be different. Wu Wan lifted his bowed head for a moment. The fight against Indra was over. Everyone was torn apart. Britra and Popner fell asleep to recover their bodies. And Zeus, father, did he just leave? He's probably somewhere close to leave. He disappeared to take power through Indra's heart. Perhaps meeting the foolish chaos indirectly had stimulated him. Wu Wan and Hargan shared a drink for the first time in a long time. It was a tavern that served Wu Wan's favorite Murim cuisine. Where do you think he is now? He's probably buried somewhere in the ground. Or maybe he's up in the sky. What are you talking about? Anyway, he'll be somewhere where there are no people. Clink. Wu Wan poured Hargan a drink. It was quite full. Then, Hargan looked at Wu Wan, who was pouring the same amount of alcohol into his own glass, and asked in surprise. What's wrong? You're the one pouring the drinks first. There's a reason for that. The alcohol was so strong that it was hard to swallow. He could not help it, as he had a body that did not get drunk easily unless it was this strong. Clang, clink, I really wanted to have a drink with you this time, but I guess that time has passed. The cups clashed, and Wu Wan emptied the alcohol in a single breath. I can't quite remember how many cups I drank. As I drank the alcohol quickly, I somewhat started to get drunk. I don't think it's very refreshing or enjoyable. Is that what you think? Isn't it Indra? Rank 6. Hargan Hodl Sashired Indra's name many times. He was the strongest high ranker among the rankers who used lightning. Like Zeus, he had been one of Hargan's idols for a long time. It was just that, because of him, the humans and dragons became enemies, so he didn't like him. You've done something historical. I'm glad you see it that way. Wu Wan held up his empty glass as if asking for another drink. Since he usually preferred coffee to alcohol, Hargan poured the drink, half worried and half amused. I think this is the first time we've had a drink like this. Is that so? I believe it that drinking alcohol makes you friends. Clink. The cups clashed once again. I like alcohol because it makes me feel closer when we drink together. I don't really like it. If it's the same bitter drink, I'd rather have coffee than alcohol. Then why are you drinking so much? Just, gulp. Wu Wan emptied the glass again and stared at the reflection of himself in the empty glass. I suddenly thought of something. Quote. What on earth had happened? Since they hadn't fought together, there was no way to know. At least, according to the story they had shared earlier, no one had died except for one of Asura's heads. That level of sacrifice was not uncommon in fights between rankers. Furthermore, Wu Wan hadn't been on particularly good terms with Asura. For him, who must have experienced countless deaths while climbing the tower, to drink so much over something like this. It was just strange in the eyes of Hargan, who did not know the circumstances. However, what wasn't there on that battlefield was. His throat, which had been moistened with alcohol, was already completely dry. He recalled the image of himself watching the battle safely from a distance. It was too pathetic that I couldn't fight there with you. That's obvious. You're not even a ranker yet. You and I are tutorial buddies. If it had been anyone else, it would have meant that his words were not comforting. Wu Wan understood the two, but he had no intention of explaining the words at length to comfort him. Hargan had grown rapidly. Even to Wu Wan, it was strange. If you looked closely, it was Hargan who had grown at an even more extraordinary rate than himself. And of all the people who had influenced him, he was probably the one who had influenced him the most. I must have been a stimulant. A stimulus. That one word was the ultimate stimulus for Hargan. Yuan, who had passed through the tutorial with him and climbed up, fought with Zeus, who had been his goal and idol. And with Indra, a high ranker ranked 6th. It would be strange if it didn't stimulate him. That's why. No more whining. Yuan blew away the drunkenness from his flushed face. His eyes changed from a moment ago, and Hargan rubbed his hands together in displeasure. Oh, what now? What were you trying to say? The atmosphere is already over. Do you know what a big deal it will be if Dionysus Hung finds out? Where did you blow away that precious drunkenness? Hargan, who was holding the bottle of alcohol next to him, lifted the bottle and showed Yuan the words written on it. Don't you see this? Clean, clear, and confident. A clear and strong drink for you who have become a ranker. P.S. Dionysus. An advertisement slogan that I had seen somewhere before. On the bottle of alcohol was a picture of Dionysus with his silver hair fluttering, drinking the alcohol by the bottle. You're going to get scolded by Hung, really? I didn't know I was playing the role of a younger brother who calls you Hung. Oh, really? I thought I'd have a drink with you properly. Hargan, who groaned, soon blew away his drunkenness as well. As much as I wanted to have a drink and have a good time this time, it seemed that time was over. Getting drunk me myself wasn't finale. So, what is going on? My father asked me favor. Favor? What? You? Me? Hargan, who had a bemused look on his face as if to ask what that meant, soon understood what it meant and leaned back. A sigh came out first. Somehow, I suddenly felt like he had simply disappeared. Are you talking about my training? Yes. Hargan. You are most like me out of my sons. Zeus's love for Hargan. No, maybe it is greed. He was shopping for another Zeus. After getting out of Asgard's prison and meeting Hargan, he had been continuously helping Hargan's training while looking for Indra. Anyway, do you know why I didn't show affection to Hercules? As it was from his own bloodline, Zeus knew Hargan best. Because of Hargan, he's the best jewel I've ever crafted. After hearing that, Yuan's thoughts about Hargan completely changed. A better jewel than Hercules. I wanted to check why Zeus said that. I simply though there was a talented player. Hargan was already being noticed as a ranker who would become a ranker in the shortest amount of time. Although their goals were different, Hargan had entered the tower with Yuan and climbed the tower faster than him. Yuan, who hadn't even climbed the tower, took the title of the player who became a ranker in the shortest amount of time as he registered in the rankings, but Yuan's thoughts were different. He had only come this far because of illegal methods. Using the clockwork, he was already a high ranker who had surpassed the top of the tower a long time ago. Hargan and he started from different starting points. That's why Yuan's evaluation of Hargan had to be much higher than the world's evaluation. I guess you trust me if you're entrusting with something you usually do yourself. It could have been something that hurt his pride. The two were motive and friends. At least Hargan thought so. That didn't mean he saw Yuan as a rival or an enemy. The gap between the two was already too wide for him to build up his pride. So, did you do that? Why not? It's not going to take that long. It was only a few days until Zeus returned. It was just enough time to take a short break and move. However, Hargan's gaze at Yuan was different. Really, that is surprising. Every action Yuan had taken so far had a reason and purpose. The guy who valued time more than anyone and was busy was going to help him train. It was strange. It's not that hard. If Hargan was really a player with more potential than Hercules, his training was very important to Yuan. The more high rankers there are, the better. In the end, in order to prepare for the future fight against the Outer, the tower's forces had to become stronger. If one more high ranker like Zeus was added, it would be quite meaningful. Besides, and I'm not just going to watch. Yuan didn't intend to waste his time on this, even if it was only for a few days. Isn't your team on the 80th floor right now? Creak. As if to declare that the drinking party was over, Yuan got up from his seat. I'll train you as we climb the tower. Chapter 296. Team leader, this is. Through the wide-open door, the members of Hargan's team looked on with bewildered expressions. Hargan had returned earlier than expected. And beside him was a familiar face. Meet your new teammate who will be climbing the tower with us from today. Hargan nodded towards Yuan. You know him, right? Kim Yuan. Introduce yourself. Nice to meet you. Their attitude towards Yuan was completely different from before. During the tutorial, they had simply thought of him as someone who was a bit more skilled than the others, but now it was a whole different story. They were now all Lipai player who had crossed this tower. Furthermore, they were now rookies who were on the verge of becoming rankers. Naturally, they had a clear understanding of what the title of ranker meant, as well as the existence of high rankers. And Yuan was currently ranked among the top high rankers. They couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the thought of climbing the tower with Yuan. And in the meantime, there was one person who was looking at Yuan for a completely different reason. Nice to meet you, Lee Sung-yoon, a player from Earth, just like Yuan. Lee Sung-yoon extended his hand towards Yuan, thinking about how long it had been since he had seen someone from his hometown. Oh, yeah, Yuan shook hands with Lee Sung-yoon as a representative. It had been a while since he had seen any familiar faces. He was a little glad. But the greeting was brief. There's a test tomorrow. This wasn't the time to be chatting idly. Let's go outside. Before they could even respond, Yuan stepped out of the door. The team members looked at each other, unable to do anything but watch as Yuan left after saying what he needed to say. He had told them to go outside. Hargan shrugged his shoulders as if he understood their expressions. That's just how he is. That was all he had to say. Hargan was the first to follow Yuan. The team's accommodation was a small cottage located a little far from the city. There was a small yard in front, and Yuan stood in the middle of it. I received a request from Zeus. He asked me to train his son. The team members all watched as Hargan and Zeus disappeared somewhere. And that was for training. This was training from Zeus, the head of a guild and one of the top 10 high rankers in this gigantic tower. Its value could not be easily converted into points. Those who use weapons, come this way. Hargan and Lee Sung-yoon, this way. The number of members in Hargan's team had dwindled. Half of the members who had been with them since the beginning of the tutorial had failed to keep up and had fallen out along the way. Now, only the paladin elf siblings, Yolch, Lee Sung-yoon, and 2 others remained. The group was divided into 2. Those who used weapons with blades and those who fought with skills that utilized magic power. Yuan summoned another guide for the group that had been divided in this way. Swish, a pale-faced swordsman with a fierce glare, drawing out a crimson sword. Susano, he appeared before Yuan and stood there. You know what to do, right? You're telling me to teach these little brats? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Susano had nothing to say in response to the decisive answer. In the first place, he was in a position where he had no choice but to do as Yuan said. All right, what could he do? Susano looked at the players in front of him as if he was taking out his anger on them. I'll start with their mindset before I teach them how to hold a sword. The tension of the team members standing in front of Susano was palpable. It would probably be quite difficult. After all, training under Susano would be quite difficult. However, there's no ranker who uses a sword as well as that guy. It had been confirmed by none other than Asura himself. Even Ashura, who was second to none, had acknowledged it with his own eyes. It was a raw ore that had been discovered after a long time. Susano was the one who acknowledged that Ashura was superior to him, at least in terms of swordsmanship. That means, he is the best swordsman in this tower. He could leave the weapon handling to him. What was important to him now was Hargan. There are 3 left. Yuan looked at the 3 players. Hargan, Lee Sung-hoon, and Elidor. There were definitely more people who didn't handle weapons than those who did. Of course, in this dangerous world, it was not easy to protect oneself without a weapon. Nevertheless, not having anything in one's hand, it means that they are that talented in mana. He already knew Hargan's talent. Elidor also had the potential to become a powerful ranker in the future. There was one left, Lee Sung-hoon. He was someone who would not have been able to pass the tutorial normally. So he didn't know how talented he was. He had seen it with his own eyes. The way he, a non-pureblood of the tower, used mana balls from the tutorial. He wanted to check it out once. How much talent does the player Lee Sung-hoon have? I think actual combat is the best training. Susutsu. Colorless spheres appeared around Yuan. Even if you die in this training, I can't help it. So. Za. Numerous mana balls appeared. Dozens, hundreds. Looking at the nearly 1,000 mana balls, Lee Sung-hoon opened his eyes wide and his mouth fell open. Block as much as you can. The 3 of you together. Gulped. He swallowed the saliva that had built up from tension. He had never seen a high ranker other than Zeus, but he was sure of one thing. Not all high rankers would be as strong as Yuan in front of him. Being able to handle that many mana balls without the slightest bit of hesitation was an ability that only a few in this tower possessed. Just watching him felt like studying. Such a realm exists. Lee Sung-hoon created as many mana balls as he could. Simple is good. Pazigggg. Hargan also raised his electric shock. The next moment, KWA rung. Hargan's team and Yu-won's magic collided. It's concentration. Pong. Poopapoo-pong. Amidst the pouring bombardment, Yu-won's voice was strangely clear. That's the most basic thing. Even if you can create and spread mana balls, if you can't hit them properly, they're no different from a toy sword in a child's hand. Lee Sung-hoon realized that he was talking to him. Mana ball. It was a weapon he had been using since the tutorial. Yu-won was now teaching him how to handle it. Draw a circle with your left hand and a triangle with your right hand. Each object feels like it's being handled by a different person. Increase the number of objects one by one. One by one, the number of mana balls increased. As Yu-won said, Lee Sung-hoon created a few more mana balls on the spot by imagining it. And in the meantime, hey, monster, quarring. Hargan shouted and spread his electric shock. Why are you taking care of only Lee Sung-hoon all day? Are you jealous now? Is there nothing I can do? You're doing well. Isn't that a compliment? That's a bit unfortunate. It wasn't just words. Hargan really had nothing that Yu-won could do anything about. Perhaps because he had taken the elite course since he was young, he had no problems such as wasting magic unnecessarily or not being able to use his abilities. Of course, if he wanted to raise him, he could. Just because there was no problem with the basics didn't mean there were no other problems. However, for now, this guy comes first. Yu-won's eyes sparkled as he looked at Lee Sung-hoon. Woo-won's eyes glistened as he looked at Lee Sung-yoon. It was a gem he had found after a long time. Why on earth has such a guy not been known until now? The world's evaluation of Lee Sung-yoon was nothing more than a member of Hargan's team. It was natural, as Lee Sung-yoon only played a supporting role in the team and never took the lead. However, the Lee Sung-yoon that Woo-won saw had a truly precious talent. He absorbs everything I teach him. The speed at which he creates mana stones, and the way he improves his shortcomings. In comparison, his physical abilities were nothing special. He was better than players of a similar level, but it was still regrettable compared to his talent. However, Lee Sung-yoon's talent for mana was so unique that it overcame all those shortcomings. He has a shining talent. Woo-won didn't ask for anything else from him. He only practiced the number of mana stones he could create and the control he had over them. That was enough for now. It wouldn't be too late to polish him further after he became a ranker. For ordinary people, becoming a ranker was their ultimate goal, but that didn't apply to players like Hargan or Lee Sung-yoon. They had to look higher. For now, it was time to focus on getting used to mana through mana stones and mastering their control. Once they got used to it, they could learn more advanced skills and apply them to it. Lee Sung-yoon had yet to find his own skill. If he were to meet a proper skill in the future, his value, which was already shining, would spread its wings. Should I increase it by one more? Woo-won pushed Lee Sung-yoon a little further, just in case. The number of mana stones pouring down from the sky increased. Lee Sung-yoon, who had been barely defending until a moment ago, quickly noticed the change. Swish, swish, swish. Another one of Lee Sung-yoon's mana stones increased. This was the 100th one. It was a number that even some rankers couldn't produce. Wah! Woo-won's attack on Lee Sung-yoon became even more intense. In response, Lee Sung-yoon also raised his mana to match the tempo. In order to block it somehow, Lee Sung-yoon's eyes, which had been pushed to the extreme, gradually lost focus. Is he in a state of selflessness? It seemed that he was concentrating on increasing the number of mana stones. It was good to concentrate, but this was dangerous. This was the limit. Whoom. The mana stones, which had reached 100, stopped. Lee Sung-yoon flinched as his mana stopped moving as he pleased. The next moment, he was able to meet Woo-won's gaze. Blaze. Blazing red eyes. The red eye gold controlled Lee Sung-yoon's mana. Let's take a break for now. Ah, yes. Thud. Lee Sung-yoon, who had been relieved of his tension, collapsed to the floor. Thank you for your hard work. He felt dazed. What on earth had he done? Lee Sung-yoon was not the only one who was surprised. Hargan was equally surprised. The thought suddenly came to him that the guy was so strong. And then, your team is ruining you. Woo-won suddenly threw a verbal bomb. Of course, Hargan couldn't just sit still at such words. What are you talking about? The team was ruining Lee Sung-yoon. It was something that Hargan, the team leader, couldn't just let pass. Don't misunderstand. I didn't mean it in a bad way. Explain it properly, then. He knew that Woo-won wasn't the type to talk nonsense. It must be true that he didn't mean it in a bad way. Hargan hurriedly asked for an explanation. Then, while climbing the tower, have you ever? Woo Won looked back at Lee Sung-yoon and continued as if it were obvious. Has there ever been anything difficult or dangerous? Chapter 297. Lee Sung-yoon became speechless after Woo Won's question. He went over the past few years he had spent climbing the tower in his head. The difficult tutorial. In contrast, he didn't think he had ever found it particularly difficult after entering the tower. You're a shark trapped in a small world like a fishbowl. You don't know how vast the ocean is, or how far you can swim. Woo Won's gaze briefly turned to Hargan. Furthermore, there's another shark in that fishbowl, so it's not unreasonable to mistake it for the ocean. Lee Sung-yoon had Hargan on his team. His talent was so great that even Zeus admitted he was superior to Heracles. In terms of talent alone, he could be counted among the top 3 in this tower. With Hargan by his side, his own talent might not have seemed so impressive. There wouldn't have been any danger either. What Lee Sung-yoon needed was simple. You need a wall, a crisis that would put his life in danger. And a tall, sturdy wall that stood before him. That was the necessary condition for Lee Sung-yoon to grow. And there was a perfect environment for that. Leave this team. Woo Won dropped a bombshell. The 80th floor test consists of a total of 10 teams. Of these, only 3 selected teams can pass the test and proceed to the next floor, and it was practically impossible for an individual to pass the test alone. That's why players who climb the tower without forming a team would feel the wall and form a team, thinking that there's a wall that they can't overcome with talent alone. However, now, despite that, there were 2 teams that had applied for the test as individuals. Lee Sung-yoon, is this really okay? A message arrived from Lee Sung-yoon. Woo Won gazed at the grasslands that stretched all the way to the horizon. The entire green grassland felt refreshing just by looking at it. A scenery that he wanted to keep looking at forever. But he had to reply to the message. Do well. He could almost hear Lee Sung-yoon cursing at the non-reply. Hargan was fiercely against it, but Woo Won thought this test was one that Lee Sung-yoon had to pass alone. Because otherwise, he would just keep marking time. Castle defense. Defense and offense. Each team would wage a siege battle over a total of 5 castles. How many times each castle was captured? How much time it took to capture the castle? The process was quantified, and the 3 teams that ultimately acquired the most points would proceed to the next floor. The test will begin. He could see enemy teams gathering outside the castle. He wasn't particularly interested in the result of this test anyway. Around 20 players. Woo Won had already experienced a similar test and climbed up. That time, his opponents numbered in the 10,000s. He didn't even feel excited. The problem was over there. Hargan's side should be fine. Hargan's team had failed the previous 80th floor test. It wasn't because they lacked skill. They had no choice but to give up the test due to Zeus's sudden intrusion. If a problem was raised, Zeus would have also been sanctioned by the administrator, but Hargan didn't do so. This test was their first retest. Naturally, they would grit their teeth and take the test, and they wouldn't fail. But Lee Sung-yoon was different. If he can climb up, I'll acknowledge him. He was taking the test alone in this test without teaming up with Woo Won. It meant he had to do the work of 10, 20 people alone. And that would have been impossible for the Lee Sung-yoon he knew up until now. First of all, fizzle, Woo Won shot out electricity through the heart of Uranus. A golden spear formed in his hand. I have to pass my own test first. And that moment, surrender. The test was over. Gasp. Lee Sung-yoon climbed up the castle wall and exhaled deeply. Players who had been targeting and attacking him were sprawled out all around him. Since they had also climbed up to the 80th floor, they were all skilled players without exception. He had fought against a team composed of such individuals. And he had fought alone. This was his first time experiencing something like this since he began climbing the tower. Poof! He planted the flag in the designated spot. Then, you have conquered the first castle wall. You have acquired 1,000 contribution points. 27 minutes and 14 seconds. Additional contribution points will be given according to the conquest time. You have acquired 510 contribution points. A message popped up saying that the siege of the second castle wall had ended. It was a welcome message, but now was not the time to be happy. He had to think about what came next. Crunch, crunch. He took out a fruit from his inventory and bit into it. It was to help restore his magical energy and replenish some of his moisture. He had successfully recaptured the castle wall. Now, the next step was defense. Only one more left. He had already succeeded in 2 sieges and 1 defense. Thanks to that, His stamina had hit rock bottom, but if he succeeded in defending one more time, he would pass the test. This was also his first time taking such a difficult test. Originally, he should have had his reliable teammates blocking the front and Hargan, the strongest spear and shield, with him. But right now, he was alone. There was no one to block the front or guard his back. I'm lucky I didn't meet the team leader. Closing his eyes and resting, Lee Sungyun recalled the tests he had taken so far. My luck with the matchups isn't bad. I just have to pass the next test well. If he were to face a team with Hargan, he wouldn't stand a chance. Even if only Hargan came out from that team, he didn't have the confidence to block him. Please let me face another team. Lee Sungyun prayed like that as he waited for the next test. However, really, thud, looking at the opponent who appeared before him, Lee Sungyun lost his will to fight. Why does this have to happen? Starting the test. Yuan walking towards the castle wall. He was clearly taking the same test as Lee Sungyun in this place. However, during yesterday's training, Lee Sungyun realized that Yuan was a player who lived in a completely different dimension from him. Well, everyone in the tower already knew that, though. Consider yourself unlucky. Lee Sungyun turned his head at the sound of Yuan's voice, who had already climbed up to the castle wall. Flutter. He was already standing in front of the flag. When did he even get here? If Yuan were to grab the flag like this, the test would be over. Still, he would have another chance since he had won 3 times, including the siege and defense. But, what are you doing? Aren't you going to stop me? Yuan urged Lee Sungyun like that. Lee Sungyun, who had been half giving up and about to hand over the flag, was flustered and asked back. This is a test, and I'm not exactly on your team, you know. Swish, 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 swish. Mana stones appeared around Yuan. He could tell even without counting them. 101 in total. It was exactly the number that Lee Sungyun could not block. Are you not going to block it? Even if I don't block it, it's not going to stop, is it? Swish, 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 swish. Lee Sungyun also created mana stones. Mana stones that condensed an enormous amount of magical energy. Not only had the number increased since the first time he met Yuan, but the quality of the magical energy imbued in each of them had also increased. Here I go again. Lee Sungyun's eyes gleamed, and at that moment, whoosh, his 100 mana stones burst out magical energy. Boom, the castle wall the two of them were on shook violently. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Colorless magical energy poured down like a waterfall. The castle wall was quickly covered in cracks as if it would collapse at any moment. Lee Sungyun broke out in a cold sweat as he looked at the wave that was rushing towards him. Still, it didn't seem as difficult as before. Has he adapted? It seemed he had adapted to handling the 100 mana poles. It was hard to see it as an accomplishment achieved in just one day. It was a mystery that couldn't be explained by just saying it was talent. That meant one thing, he had the ability to control this much from the beginning. The real thing started now. His limit, which he couldn't reach. In that, Lee Sungyun shone even brighter. Lee Sungyun thought of a way to penetrate Yuan's mana. If he made one more mana pole here, would the result change? No, it wouldn't change. Yuan had enough mana and control over it to create as many mana poles as he wanted. Then he needed to come up with a different method. Concentration, the best he could do. Lee Sungyun closed his eyes. Yuan's words came to his mind. Draw a circle with your left hand and a triangle with your right. It's like two different people are handling each object. There was a big difference between knowing the principle and not knowing it. Until then, it had been something he had done by instinct, but now he could find a way to improve it. Chach, chach. The over 100 mana poles combined into one. When that many combined, their size should have increased, but Lee Sungyun's didn't. However, that made it even more threatening. With this, confidence filled his chest. He felt like he could at least get one hit in. Imagination. Lee Sungyun imagined the strongest and simplest weapon he could think of. That would be a gun. He reached his hand forward. A single, small, and weak-looking mana pole. Lee Sungyun reached out to it. At that moment, this is the trigger. Waak. The mana pole emitted a huge light. Just one shot. Just one shot, but a formidable force was fired from the mana pole. This time would be different, Lee Sungyun didn't doubt it. However, not bad. Kwang. Despite his efforts, Lee Sungyun's move was easily broken apart. Quote exclamation mark quote. The sharpness of the sword that came close to his face. For a split second, Lee Sungyun felt like his body was going to be cut in half and his breath would be cut off. Without realizing it, Lee Sungyun covered his neck with one hand. But fortunately, all that was cut was one of the mana poles floating next to him. You've crossed the threshold this time. Yuan put the sword back in his hand. He had drawn his sword out of reflex. Even if he had been hit, there wouldn't have been much damage because of the protection of the sea, but even so, Lee Sungyun had made him draw his sword. And that alone meant that Lee Sungyun's move just now was better than the skills of most rankers. This much is a passing grade. He had the potential and skills to display this much power. It didn't make sense to grow this much in such a short period of time, and all Yuan had done was draw out his latent skills. Now the problem is me. Creak. Yuan slightly loosened his grip on the sword and looked down at the black glove. Uranus's heart, an item that allowed him to handle all three attributes of mana, lightning, darkness, and water. Is that an item you made with the lightning you stole from me? When Zeus met him again, he said after seeing Yuan handling Uranus's heart. You've been wasting treasure. Zeus had been handling lightning for thousands of years. Maybe he knew how to handle Uranus. Chapter 298. 3 teams passed the 80th floor trial. No. To be exact, it was 1 team and 2 individuals. I didn't think we'd actually pass. Right, wasn't it pretty difficult? Don't tease me, I really thought I was going to die. A small tavern in the city. Lee Seong-yoon, surrounded by his original teammates, collapsed into his seat with a groan. He had just finished the trial and had moved on to the next floor. Lee Seong-yoon couldn't control his trembling legs. And that fatigue and relieved tension quickly turned into resentment. If it was that difficult, couldn't you have at least yielded the flag? The target of his resentment was Yuan, who had naturally become a part of the team at some point. When they faced off in the siege battle, Yuan had clearly said, pass. It meant that he had crossed a certain line that he had expected. Of course, the result fell far short of Lee Seong-yoon's expectations. Even though he thought it was a great blow, in the end, it didn't even leave a scratch on Yuan. Still, it was a pass. Lee Seong-yoon had secretly hoped that Yuan would give him a little leeway. But, where in the exam is there room for leniency? You have to climb up on your own strength. To begin with, it's strange that you participated in a team exam by yourself. Thanks to that, don't you know a little bit more now? Yuan raised his glass and took a sip before continuing. What makes you different from the others? Lee Seong-yoon, who would have shaken his head and said he didn't know in the past, became a mute who had eaten honey this time. He, too, had realized it. What kind of talent he had, to what extent his worth was, and what kind of vessel he could become. The moment you set a ceiling for yourself, your vessel will become that much smaller. Just keep that in mind, and you'll get much faster than you are now. I'll keep that in mind. The guy who had been grumbling about how hard it was just a moment ago quickly nodded his head and chewed on something in his mouth. Lee Seong-yoon was definitely quick to realize. He's a big guy. Originally, it was a short journey to raise Hargan. However, in Yuan's view, Hargan had already grown enough, and the bottom layer was perfect. He had seen and learned a lot since he was a child as the Prince of Olympus. Naturally, his ideals were high and his ambitions were broad. On the other hand, Lee Seong-yoon was next to such a Hargan and did not properly realize his own worth. What these two need is time. The other team members also had the qualities to become excellent rankers, but those two were on a different level from them. If only they were given time, they would surely become the top high rankers. All Yuan did was bring that time forward a little bit. But what's going on? Hargan looked at Yuan as if he were strange. It was a gathering to celebrate passing the exam. He didn't mind it, but it didn't seem natural for Yuan to be here at this moment. You're spending all your time on things like this. In Hargan's mind, Yuan was a friend who was too busy to even have a drink. Of course, going up the tower together was a given, and it was hard to even dream of having an after-party like this together. So why was Yuan here at a gathering like this? There are people waiting. You'll probably be surprised if you hear. Yuan said so. The ears of the team members gathered in their seats perked up. How great a name would come out. Everyone waited with bated breath for the next words. But no matter how much time passed. So who is it? Yuan's answer did not return. Pretending not to hear, Yuan raised his empty glass. Just one more drink here. Hey. Fizzle. Golden lightning filled her vision. Her vision darkened for a moment, and Yuan reached out instinctively. Bam! A heavy fist entered her hand. Her vision, which had been cut off, returned, and Hargan's flustered face came into view. Boom! Zop! Hargan's head snapped back. In an instant, Hargan's body, which had been flying forward, was thrown in the opposite direction. Bang, bang, crack. Several trees fell, creating a small path. Yuan walked towards Hargan, who was buried in the fallen trees. Even without using skills, your technique is simple enough to be obvious. That way, you may be able to win against opponents weaker than you, but you will never be able to win against opponents of similar or greater skill. Creak, thud. Hargan, who pushed away the pile of wood with one hand, groaned and got up from his seat. His hit chin was throbbing, but it wasn't a big enough shock to make him faint. It meant that Yuan had enough margin to control his strength. You don't have any tension for fighting. You must be too used to fighting the weak. Are you telling me to get used to fighting strong opponents? It's natural to win against opponents weaker than me, but you can only become truly strong if you win against opponents stronger than me. Hargan's magic power was special. Born with the blood of Zeus and the power of lightning, he had been crushing his opponents with overwhelming power. Even now, he was skilled enough to subdue several player teams in an instant and face several rankers. And that was rather toxic to Hargan. A simple and ignorant way of fighting. That way of fighting had become fixed at some point and had become a habit. Yuan was not confident that he could teach Hargan better than Zeus. It was impossible to be a better teacher than Zeus in the attribute of lightning in the first place. So Yuan decided to teach Hargan how to fight. Let's start again. Hargan, who was getting up from his seat, frowned. His legs were tingling. No matter how weak he was hit, if he was hit all day without rest, the shock would inevitably accumulate. His legs wouldn't move. Yuan also noticed that Hargan's condition was gradually reaching its limit. Yuan, who had withdrawn his magic power, approached Hargan. Take a break. I'll be fine with a little rest. You need to rest enough. Resting is also important. I'm the worst at that. Knock, knock. Hargan grumbled, hitting his legs with his fists and applying medicine to his wounds with his other hand. It seemed that he wanted to recover his body as soon as possible and stick to it again. It's good to stick around for a long time. 3 days. It was the time Yuan had been training Hargan and Lee Sungyun. How great must he be for you to wait this long? Hargan was the type who couldn't stand being curious. He had already asked the same question more than 10 times. However, Yuan did not budge at that question and pretended not to know, avoiding his gaze and talking about something else. If he was even a little weaker than him, he would have forced him to open his mouth, but he wasn't an opponent he could do that to. Isn't it time you told me? He spoke out of frustration. Well, I guess so. Yeah, well, what? Hargan was rather embarrassed by the sudden change in reaction. Clearly, just a couple hours ago, the guy didn't seem like he would ever tell him, but now he was opening his mouth so easily. Did my nagging finally get through? He didn't think he was the type to be persuaded, but it was good anyway. He wanted to get his curiosity out of the way before he changed his mind. So, who is it? It's Zeus. Zeus, our father. Hargan shot up from his seat. Hargan sprang up from his seat. As soon as he got up, his legs wobbled. Yuan looked up at Hargan, who was rushing out, and asked. Are your legs okay? Are my legs the problem right now? It was a fairly hasty reaction. Well, that's why he didn't answer. Perhaps you'll try to run away as soon as you find out I'm back. Why, Hargan doesn't hate you that much. The training was a bit difficult. At Zeus's answer, Yuan thought that Hargan was less persistent than he had thought. However, when he took over Hargan's training directly as he had asked, it wasn't that either. What the hell did he do to get this kind of reaction? In the meantime, Hargan tried to escape from his seat as much as possible, dragging his loose leg. He reacted as if Zeus would appear here at any moment and devour him. Stay still. You can't go anywhere anyway. You don't know anything. You don't know how toxic our father is. His voice was trembling. This was the first time. It was the first time he had seen Hargan so agitated. I would have died in a few more days. Unable to do anything, turning into a chicken father, a devil. You're being harsh on your father. Hargan was startled. Hargan, who had frozen like a hamster, slowly turned his head. He hoped it wasn't true, but it wasn't like he had misheard. Father, Zeus. He was a foot taller than Hargan, looking down at Hargan from behind. I'm sorry. At Yuan's apology, Hargan realized that Zeus's presence here was no coincidence. Once their eyes met, there was no way he could escape from Zeus. Now, he had no choice but to be taught by Zeus again, just like before. You're right, you're a surprising person. Hargan, who now seemed resigned, sat back down on the floor. Yuan looked at Zeus's eyes that had appeared behind Hargan. Something has changed. He couldn't tell what had changed just by looking at his appearance. He had acquired Indra's heart. It was the heart of the 6th ranker, who had consumed the blood of numerous dragons and possessed immense magic power and intelligence. Zeus, who had lost his thunderbolt, tried to regain his former power by acquiring it. No, if Yuan's prediction was correct, he should have become stronger than when he had the thunderbolt. How much has he changed? His golden eyes sparkled. Yuan looked at it and asked, "Are you satisfied?" So, it wasn't a bad answer. He didn't seem to be satisfied, but he gave a positive answer, saying so. Perhaps now, once again, there seemed to be a big change in the tower's rankings. Zeus's head moved. The surroundings were in chaos from his training with Hargan. He rolled his golden eyes and opened his mouth. "I'm the last one. You're very late." Hargan made a bewildered expression at the conversation between the two. The last one. Thinking about it, Hargan looked around. Then, I didn't think this day would come again. Swoosh. Smoke filled the air. At the same time, the bright weather turned into night in an instant. In the dim vision, Hargan noticed that someone who hadn't been there before had appeared. That wasn't all. It's not a very welcome reunion. The salty smell of the sea stung his nose. This voice and this smell. It belonged to someone he could never forget. Thinking about it, Hargan rubbed his eyes. And the next moment, an unbelievable scene entered his eyes. Two people standing in front and behind Zeus. Hades, Poseidon. The three main gods of Olympus gathered in one place. Chapter 299, Gigantomachia is over. Olympus is now in an era of peace. Rather than creating an enemy that doesn't exist like you and growing stronger, it's time to build up our strength. Since he was young, Hargan grew up dreaming of three people. The heavenly god, Zeus. The god of death, Hades. The god of the sea, Poseidon. Known as the three main gods of Olympus, they each firmly protected their domains. Zeus, the sky, Hades, the underworld, Poseidon, the sea. It went without saying that they did not interfere with each other's domains, and they did not face each other. That's how they spent a really long time. But now, the three of them gathered in one place. Isn't this the first time they've gathered like this? He hadn't shared many stories with his father, Zeus. However, he had never heard that all three of them had gathered before. That's because Olympus was a guild with a thoroughly individualistic nature. It's the first time since that day. That's why we didn't have a chance to meet like this. It's been a long time, brothers. Zeus greeted Hades and Poseidon. A strange current flowed between the three of them. It was a long-awaited reunion, but no one was happy about this moment. They were brothers, but now they were in a relationship that was inferior to others. Among them, Poseidon was particularly upset. Don't you think we're close enough to greet each other warmly? Before Olympus was destroyed, Poseidon was imprisoned in Asgard's prison by Zeus. Of course, considering the years he had lived, it was not that long. However, that did not mean that his sense of betrayal or anger would diminish. That's right. Knowing that, how can you? Don't worry, I have no regrets about Olympus now. Zeus' gaze turned to Hades. Unlike Poseidon, who growled with his teeth bared, Hades watched quietly as usual. I heard the news. Olympus is in shambles. Unlike his light bland speech, the meaning contained in it was reproach. How did Olympus get into this state? The huge guild that used to dominate the tower with Asgard has now become one of the ordinary large guilds. That was the reputation of Olympus, which had recently disappeared from Zeus. My eldest brother is a great commander. That's why I thought that you alone should not be the leader of a single group. What are you trying to say? Olympus needs more power. Olympus needs a greater power. Hades closed his eyes, forgetting even the purpose of his visit here. You must get out of here. Eugene looked at Hades with a serious expression. You know that you're not allowed to be here, right? Hades snorted. So what? I have nowhere else to go. There are other places you can go. You don't have to stay here. I don't want to go anywhere else. This is my home. This isn't your home. You don't belong here. I belong here more than you do. Hades glared at Eugene. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know why I'm here. I know enough. I know that you're a threat to the tower. I know that you're dangerous. I'm not dangerous. I'm just trying to protect myself. You're not protecting yourself. You're just making things worse. I'm not making things worse. I'm just trying to survive. Hades turned away from Eugene. Leave me alone. Eugene sighed. I can't do that. I have to make sure that you leave the tower. You can't make me do anything. Yes, I can. I'm the tower master. I have the authority to do whatever I want. Hades laughed. You're not the tower master. You're just a kid. I'm not a kid. I'm the tower master. And I'm telling you to leave. I'm not going to leave. Hades turned and walked away. Eugene watched him go, then turned and walked away in the opposite direction. In the process, Zeus had never been wrong once. Just as Zeus had said, Yu-1 still had yet to properly handle Uranus's heart. Hades closed his eyes, even forgetting why he had come here. But that only lasted for a moment. Let's settle our family squabble later. Clap, a round of applause that didn't fit the atmosphere gathered gazes. Zeus, Hades, Poseidon. All three of them looked at the hand that Yu-1 had raised. Isn't that what all of you came here curious about? The reason why these three people, who never gathered together, were able to come together like this was one thing. It was because of the item known as Uranus's heart. Not to mention Zeus, who was originally the master of lightning, even Poseidon had been searching for the Ocean King's stone for a long time. Although he hadn't shown it, even Hades had wandered all over the tower looking for a black god stone, which was the core of lightning, like the thunder god stone. And yet, an item made by combining three such stones. It was impossible for them to not be interested. That originally belonged to me. Poseidon's eyes, looking at Uranus's heart, sparkled with greed. I received it as a reward after passing the trial. It's naturally mine. Your mouth is really, don't forget the condition. Poseidon's eyes narrowed at Yuan's words. Yu-1 was the one who had taken him out of the prison he had been locked up in Asgard. Just like Zeus, who had gotten out on the condition of helping with Ragnarok, he also had a condition in exchange for finding freedom. You want me to act as your teacher? Yu-1 nodded his head. You don't have to call it a teacher, but something like that. And on top of that, promise that you won't cause any more trouble. A little while ago, Yu-1 had contacted Odin. He asked to borrow Poseidon for a bit. Odin, who had already experienced this once with Zeus, didn't show any displeasure and instead asked the reason first. What did he plan to use Poseidon for? Odin, who owed Yu-1 a debt because of Ragnarok, granted him that request. Thanks to that, Poseidon was able to come outside like this and appear in front of Yu-1. Although it was possible that he wouldn't keep his promise, Yu-1 didn't think he would. He knew how strong Poseidon's obsession with the Ocean King's stone was. The three supreme gods of Olympus. There was one thing Yu-1 wanted in common with them. I want to learn how to handle this item. For that, I need to be proficient in all three attributes. You are rotting away the treasure. Zeus thought that Wu-Yun had not yet been able to properly handle the heart of Ouranos, as he had said. He was using magic power with various attributes, but that was just a borrowed ability from the item. In many ways, Wu-Yun was still inexperienced in handling magic power with various attributes. I will repay the debt. Poseidon paid the price of freedom, and Zeus paid the price of training Helgen. Hades was the only one who came here with pure curiosity without any price, so Wu-Yun bowed his head to him. Still, it was fortunate. Hades was not acting out of pure goodwill. I'm only curious about Tartarus. I don't need anything else. His gaze turned to Ouranos in Wu-Yun's hand. They had something they wanted from each other. This made the story much easier. I'll start first. Slurp. Poseidon was the first to approach Wu-Yun. Flames flickered in his eyes. He glared at Wu-Yun with fierce eyes as if he were a mortal enemy and held his trident in his hand. His intention was clear. He intended to take revenge on Wu-Yun under the guise of training. What? Wu-Yun smiled faintly at his obvious and childish intentions. Yes, the order is fine. He knew it would turn out this way. Zeus supported Helgen. As the three of them, including Hades, moved far away, the stage was roughly set. The air became humid. It had been a long time since he had held a spear. Excitement coursed through his entire body. He wanted to run up to Wu-Yun right now and pierce his throat with his spear. But, don't be careless, his experience told him. The opponent was not ordinary. Just looking at how Zeus, the king of Olympus, had been dragged down because of Wu-Yun was enough to tell. Wu-Yun had something beyond his abilities. Ku-wook. Poseidon calmed down his excitement and looked at Wu-Yun. The humid air soon turned into fog. In the hazy field of vision, Poseidon's blue eyes flashed. Did you say you wanted to be taught? Beyond the fog. Wu-Yun's pupils burned red. The moment he saw one eye red and the other sparkling gold, Poseidon felt a strange sense of threat. Something he couldn't grasp. As expected, it was not a good idea to rush in blindly. Splash. Blue waves swirled around Poseidon. The waves rode around Poseidon and gathered at the tip of his spear. A momentum like a huge tidal wave was contained in the small waves, and its power was fully contained in his spear. Then I guess I should adapt to water first. Kwau. The spear moved and water splashed in a parabolic shape. In an instant, a huge ocean was formed. Poseidon, who had changed the surrounding terrain in an instant, was not satisfied with that and continued to move his spear as if he was dancing. Shwaa, splash, the ocean sang, stirring up the waves. The huge monster named the ocean moved as Poseidon intended. Eugene realized that if he wanted, he could use the monster called the ocean to crush him. This was Poseidon, the god of the sea, a high ranker who subdued his opponents using the power of the sea, which he controlled at will. It's worth calling you, Weruk. The Wan Jiamjung shone. The two eyes, each with a different color, looked at Poseidon and the ocean he had created around him. Shwaa, the wriggling ocean rose up. Dozens of tidal waves rose and surrounded the area. It felt more solid than when he was surrounded by tens of thousands of players. Poseidon, who had created the tidal waves, moved the tip of his spear, his blue eyes shining. This is it. In front of the vast ocean, humans were nothing more than lumps of flesh. Even water, which could be seen anywhere, weighed hundreds of millions of tons when it gathered to form an ocean, and its power was nothing short of divine. This was the real power that made him called the god of the sea. No matter how fast or how long he flew, a player who hadn't even become a ranker yet wouldn't be able to dodge or block it with his wits. At least, that's what Poseidon thought at that moment. However, how ignorant. Zeus, who had been watching him from the clouds in the sky, clicked his tongue as if he was disappointed. Come to think of it, you must not know the ways of the world now that you've gotten out of prison. Hades muttered as if he agreed, ridiculing Poseidon's foolishness. You don't even know what rank that guy is. Chapter 300. With a whoosh, a gigantic tidal wave converged towards a single point. Poseidon gripped his trident in one hand and clenched the other into a fist. Sweat dripped down Poseidon's forehead as he controlled the tidal wave with his fingertips. With a crack, he tightened his grip enough to make his knuckles turn white. In the midst of the swirling maelstrom, the figure of Yuan was faintly visible. I'll only hurt him just enough so that he doesn't die. He had to keep Yuan alive so that he could be freed. So he wouldn't kill him. But that didn't mean he was going to let him go without a fight. He would make the boy suffer as much as he had suffered while trapped in Asgard's prison. You're still too arrogant to show yourself before me. Slash. The tidal wave split in two. Yuan overcame the immense pressure. Poseidon's eyes widened in disbelief. What the? This was impossible. He knew that Yuan was intelligent. He had seen it in the game he had created, where even the great Zeus had been surprised by Yuan's performance. But no matter how clever he was, there was no way he could overcome overwhelming power. So why? Boom. The tidal wave split in two. Yuan, who had cut through the tidal wave with his sword, was clearly visible. Flick. Their eyes met. At some point, Yuan had been looking right through him. I don't really need to be taught. Yuan's gaze turned to the tidal wave that was surrounding him. I just needed to see it. To see it. What did that even mean? Poseidon grew tense again. His heart, which had been light when he first decided to fight Yuan, had suddenly become heavy. He had to be serious. If he lost here, he wouldn't be able to face the two people watching him from the sidelines. This would be the ultimate humiliation. Clench. He tightened his grip on his trident. He increased his magic power, adding more pressure to the tidal wave. But strangely, the tidal wave didn't budge. What kind of magic had he used? Poseidon's tidal wave was no longer approaching Yuan. An invisible force was pushing back Poseidon's tidal wave. Is it because of that? The shining gauntlet on Yuan's hand. The heart of Uranus. It was an item that had been strengthened by the power of the sea god's stone. Even the sea god's stone alone contained the ability to control the power of the sea. And now that item had been strengthened by combining it with the other fragments. It was hard to even guess how powerful it had become. Crackle. Envy and jealousy blinded him. Veins popped out on Poseidon's forehead, and his teeth gritted together. To rely on the power of an item to fight. That item should have been in his hands. It was natural to be greedy. And greed always led to anger. You're 1,000 years too early to have that. Whoosh, splash, and electricity overpowers water. The seawater parted as Poseidon thrust his spear towards Wu Yun. The distance narrowed in an instant. Wu Yun's pupils reflected the tip of Poseidon's spear. And in that moment, boong, clang, a jet black spear blocked Poseidon's trident. Quote. If you're going to fight with a spear, I wouldn't have even called you. Gulp. Wu Yun's arms swelled up. An enormous amount of magic power that he had never seen before gathered. Poseidon's pupils dilated and his hand holding the trident trembled. The power of a giant dwells in your arms. Gigantification. The skill that made the giant slayer, Hercules, who he was today. Wu Yun's spear pushed away Poseidon's spear. It meant that Poseidon was being pushed back when they clashed with just strength alone. What the heck is this? Something ridiculous was happening. For him to be pushed back in strength. If it was an advantage due to an item, that excuse would be hard to make in a situation where they were clashing spears. He was literally being pushed back in a head-on clash of strength. Clang, screech. Poseidon, who was blown far back, stopped himself by skimming over the water flowing in the air. Snap, he gnashed his teeth once again. Poseidon glared at Wu Yun, who was holding a spear in his hand, and raised his voice. If it wasn't for your gigantification. If it wasn't for it. A small but clear voice. You sure have a lot to say one way or another. Poseidon was speechless at the pitiful look in his eyes. The flow of this fight was so different from what he had originally planned and expected. A guy who hasn't even become a ranker yet dares. Your rank is in the 80s, right? Whoosh, roughly waving waves. Warururuk, a purple flame blocking the waves. No, I guess I'm in the 70s now because a few people disappeared before me. What are you trying to say? It seems like you don't know much about the world yet. He felt suffocated. The flames pushed away the tidal wave. Overwhelmed by the gaze that met his, Poseidon involuntarily took a step back. Who do you think sent those people who disappeared? The traces of those who had disappeared from the rankings. Surtur, Indra, the Jade Emperor. The names of the top-ranking high rankers who had dominated the tower had disappeared. Poseidon was not well informed about the recent changes in the tower. Of course, he knew about the existence of the huge incident, but he didn't know the details. But now, Wu Yun was talking about those incidents. Who dragged them down from above? Are you saying it was you? In an instant, Olympus' raid came to mind. Hades, Poseidon, Zeus. The three gods had gathered in one place. The one who had created that stage was none other than Wu Yun. And that great Zeus had fallen from that place and was imprisoned in Asgard's prison. It wasn't an unrealistic story. But surely, Warururuk. When fire and water collide, magic had something called compatibility. Water overpowers fire, and what beats water is lightning. And out of the two, Yu-1 chose to bring out the element that was at a disadvantage. But, evaporate, chi, steam so thick that it could blind him rose up into the sky. Poseidon watched as the water he had created disappeared and slowly opened his mouth that had been shut. And so did Yu-1, who was watching him. Water is defeated by a larger fire. Common sense. Warururuk, flames that pierced through the steam and rose up to the sky. Poseidon made a bewildered expression as he watched the giant flames. Common sense. Fire needed a power much greater than the other to defeat water. At this moment, Yuan's fire was doing just that. He was overpowering Poseidon. This kind of common sense doesn't exist. A player who's not even a ranker yet. When the time comes later. Waak, the flames that rose up into the sky created the shape of a giant. It wasn't clear, but Poseidon could clearly tell what the shape was and who it was. Surtur, the high ranker who handled the strongest fire in the tower. A monster that could wipe out several large guilds with his own strength. He had now appeared here, borrowing Yuan's fire. And at that moment, take a look at what my rank is. Poseidon mumbled as he watched the flaming sword fall. Rank. Yu-1 was clearly a player who hadn't finished climbing the tower yet. He couldn't solve the mystery. Before he could finish his thought, the flaming sword fell on Poseidon's head. Waak, Piyurang, the flaming sword split the sea. Poseidon's body fell down with the thick steam. Shwa, the tsunami that had been swaying dangerously crashed down. The shape of Surtur that had appeared for a moment also dispersed, unable to maintain itself any longer. Warururuk, Yu-1, who had flames wrapped around his body, let out a long breath. Sweat trickled down his forehead and cheeks. His eyes were dizzy from using such a massive amount of flames so suddenly. I overdid it, he thought as he looked at the changed landscape and the burning trees. But he couldn't help it. If I don't suppress him once, he'll show his teeth again. Poseidon's goal was revenge against him and Uranus's heart. And most of those types didn't let go of their prey easily, especially when they thought their opponent was weaker than them. That was why Yu-1 needed to make sure to suppress Poseidon in this battle. Fortunately, unlike when he had destroyed Olympus, he now had the power to overpower Poseidon. Of course, he had called Poseidon because he was confident he could do it. Tisk, tisk, tisk. A presence was felt right above his head. Yu-1 looked up. The sun was shining right above him, making his eyes sting and naturally causing him to frown. It's more like thievery than teaching. It's your turn next. Do you have a long way to go? Are you very tired? A little. I thought you'd say no. Paget, Kijiji. At first glance, Zeus descending from the sky looked like a god. Even on second glance, Zeus felt different from before. Compared to Zeus not long ago, and even compared to his prime when he wielded lightning, his current form seemed far superior. It was like looking at a volcano that could erupt at any moment. Right now, he was rather tame. If he got angry and exploded at any moment, a disaster would unfold around him. His body was wrapped in golden lightning, with occasional flashes of blue lightning mixed in. He was now both Zeus and Indra. Are you trying to pierce through the nature of an attribute by looking at the mana molecules reflected in the mirror of Wan? I had that in mind, too. Breathing shallowly several times, Wu Wen hurriedly recovered his stamina and magic power. The mirror of Wan pierces through everything it sees, such as objects, skills, and the short-term future. Through that eye, Wu Wen grasped the magic power that Poseidon was wielding. It was to figure out how he could properly handle the water attribute magic power that he was most vulnerable to. Of course, the battle was too short for that. But your brother made it difficult. He's always been the most lacking of the three of us. He's just full of pride and talk. All listen, I'm telling you to listen. Come to your senses now. With a sharp reply, Zeus raised his hand. Did you say you wanted to know how to handle lightning? Kijiji, Paget. The volcano stirred. Zeus showed off his presence as if he was going to explode soon. I felt the power of the dragon's feet from him. It was the magic power he had gained from Indra. Mirror of Wan comprehends the nature. From now on, I had to be careful with even the blink of an eye. Whatever the change of heart, Zeus had made up his mind to raise him. He was different from Poseidon, who had just swung his spear, unable to overcome his anger. Perhaps from this moment on, Wu Wen felt that he might be able to climb higher. Look, that dazzling lightning that could cover the world. What would happen if the heart of Uranus were to be held in the hands of Zeus? My heart raced just imagining it. Perhaps with that alone, Zeus would have the power to threaten Odin. But now, the heart of Uranus was in his hands. I had no intention of handing it over. Uranus would gain great power if it fell into Zeus's hands, but Wu Wen was looking at a higher place than that. Let's begin.